The sky over Tokyo's settlement tore open at 11:47 in the evening. Radar screens across the Britannian military network turned white. Static consumed every frequency. Communications officers stared at their displays as targeting systems reset themselves 3 times in 8 seconds, each reboot failing to explain what had punctured the atmosphere above Shinjuku ghetto. The object descended without burning. No heat signature, no engine trail. Just a white form dropping through the night like a meteor with intent. It struck the eastern quarter of the ghetto hard enough to crack pavement 3 blocks out. Dust rose in a perfect circle. When it cleared, something stood in the crater that shouldn't have existed in this world. A mobile suit, 20 meters tall, white armor with blue accents. Design philosophy completely alien to nightmare frame engineering. No land spinners, no slash Harkins, no fax sphere sensors. Just clean lines and a presence that made the surrounding buildings feel temporary. The Britannian patrol station 2 kilometers away received new orders within 90 seconds. Suppress. Contain. Investigate. 6 Sutherland-class nightmare frames moved into position. Standard urban pacification formation. The squad leader opened a channel to command. Target confirmed. Unknown classification. Engaging. The white machine didn't move. Inside the cockpit, Seitsuna F. Sae opened his eyes. The descent had been violent. Consciousness had fragmented during atmospheric entries scattered across quantum probability until the twin drive system forced reality to pick a version and commit. He'd survived worse. The headache pressing against his temples would fade. His fingers moved across the control interface. System diagnostics scrolled past. Main screen. Auxiliary feeds. Damage assessment. Twin drive status locked. Safety protocols engaged. Output restricted to 30%. The quantum jump had destabilized synchronization between the 2 GN drives. They were running, but barely speaking to each other. Full capability would require recalibration he couldn't perform in a combat zone. He studied the tactical display. 6 hostile units approaching. Humanoid configuration. Smaller than mobile suits. Closer to labor frames in scale. The energy signatures read wrong. Not GN particles. Something cruder. Chemical numb. The reading suggested an entirely different technological foundation. This wasn't his world. The realization arrived without emotion. Facts simply arranged themselves. The quantum teleportation system had malfunctioned. Destination coordinates had scattered. The drives had locked to prevent catastrophic failure. He was alone in an unknown location with restricted combat capability and no clear path back. Janjung still existed here. That much was obvious. The armed units proved it. The burning buildings in the distance confirmed it. Setsuna's hands moved to the controls. The first Sutherland opened fire at 400 meters. Assault rifle rounds sparked against the Gundam's chest armor and fell to the ground without leaving marks. The GN field wasn't even active. The armor simply refused to acknowledge the attack. No effect targets composition unknown. All units concentrated fire. 6 nightmare frames unleashed simultaneous volleys. The sound rolled across Shinjuku like thunder, trapped between buildings. Civilians still hiding in the rubble pressed themselves flatter against concrete. The white machine raised its right arm. The movement was economical. No wasted motion. The GN sword remained in rifle configuration. Setsuna's finger touched the trigger with the same pressure he'd used to turn a page. A particle beam crossed the distance in silence. It struck the lead Sutherland's assault rifle dead center. Metal superheated and deformed. The weapon dropped from the Nightmare's hand, glowing red, structurally compromised, but not detonated. The Britannian pilot stared at his empty manipulator. What just... The next shot took the second Sutherland's right leg at the knee joint. Clean separation. No explosion. The nightmare pitched forward and caught itself on its hands, unable to stand but not crippled beyond repair. Setsuna fired 4 more times in 3 seconds. Each shot targeted a different nightmare. Each shot removed a weapon or a limb with surgical precision, not killing blows, disabling cuts. The 6th pilot tried to retreat. His Sutherland made it 12 meters before the beam took out both land spinners. The machine ground to a halt, sparking but functional, the cockpit untouched. Silence settled over the battlefield. 6 nightmare frames lay scattered across the street. Disabled, disarmed. Pilots alive and conscious inside their machines, breathing hard, trying to understand what had just happened. The white mobile suit lowered its weapon. Setsuna scanned the area. Thermal imaging showed clusters of human signatures in the surrounding structures. Non-combatants, trapped between the military presence and whatever conflict had torn this district apart before his arrival. His hand moved to the communications panel. He cycled through frequencies, listening. Most channels carried military traffic. Clipped voices reporting casualties. Grid coordinates, orders to suppress resistance in the 11th district. One frequency carried something different. Civilian voices, panicked, asking for evacuation routes that didn't exist. Setsuna changed course. The Gundam stepped over the disabled nightmares and moved deeper into the ghetto. Its footsteps were lighter than they should have been for something that massive. GN particle distribution allowed for weight manipulation. The buildings barely trembled as 20 tons of armor and weaponry passed between them. He found the civilians 3 blocks east. 47 people pressed into a collapsed apartment building. The structure had taken damage from artillery fire. The western wall had caved in. The eastern side would follow within the hour. The Gundam knelt. Setsuna extended the mobile suit's left hand palm up next to the building's emergency exit. The gesture required no explanation. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then a woman with a child stepped forward. Then an elderly man. Then others. They climbed onto the outstretched hand in groups of 5 and 6. Setsuna transported them across the rubble field to stable ground 400 meters south, away from the active combat zone. 3 trips. No words exchanged. Just action and acceptance. On the final trip, a young man looked up at the Gundam's faceplate. "Who are you?" Setsuna didn't answer. He had no answer that would mean anything here. He lowered the last group to safety and turned back toward the impact crater. The military response would escalate. More units would come, heavier weapons. This intervention had bought time, nothing more. He needed to understand this world's conflict structure before the next engagement. The Gundam returned to the crater and stopped. Setsuna ran deeper diagnostics on the twin drive system. The damage wasn't mechanical. The drives themselves were intact. The problem was synchronization. They'd fallen out of phase during the quantum jump. Forcing them back into alignment without proper calibration equipment would risk permanent damage. He needed time, resources. Neither were available in a combat zone. His screen flickered. New contact, single unit, approaching from the west, faster than the previous nightmares. Different energy signature. Setsuna pulled up visual feed. A red nightmare frame, more sophisticated than the Sutherlands. Custom configuration. It stopped at the perimeter of the crater and stood there, studying him. The communication channel opened with a burst of static. "You're not from around here." A woman's voice, young, sharp, no fear in it. That display, those weapons. Nothing in the Britannian arsenal moves like that. Setsuna said nothing, not much of a talker. "Fine, I've got one question. You just saved 47 people from a kill zone. Was that tactical necessity, or do you actually give a damn?" He considered the question. Truth was simpler than deception. War needs to end. Poetic, vague, not particularly useful. The red nightmare shifted its stance. but I'll take it over the standard Britannian response. This is Shinjuku. You just stepped into something a lot bigger than a random patrol skirmish. I didn't choose this location, clearly. That entrance was either the worst infiltration attempt in history or something broke on your end. A pause. Which means you're stuck here. Limited support, unknown territory, and you just announced yourself to every military frequency in Area 11. The Red Nightmare took one step back. If you want to survive the next 6 hours, you need to understand how this world works. The power structure, the factions, the things people are willing to die for. The voice dropped half a degree. And the things they're willing to kill for. I've seen war before. Not this one. This is different. This is war with a script. War as performance. War where the narrative matters more than the body count. The Nightmare's sensors pulsed. Someone will try to recruit you. Someone will try to kill you. Someone will try to turn you into a symbol. Don't let them. Symbols die faster than soldiers here. The channel closed. The Red Nightmare turned and vanished into the urban maze with a kind of speed that suggested a pilot who knew every alley and sightline in the district. Setsuna watched it go. Then he returned his attention to the diagnostics. 15 minutes later, the second wave arrived. Not nightmares this time. Aerial reconnaissance. Drones equipped with high-resolution imaging systems. They maintained a 2-kilometer perimeter, circling, recording, transmitting data back to headquarters. Setsuna didn't engage. Let them watch. Let them document. The information would spread through their command structure. Analysis would begin. Threat assessments would be written. Classification debates would start. All of that took time. And time was what he needed to understand the parameters of this conflict. He pulled up the communication logs he'd intercepted. Military channels, civilian distress calls, news broadcasts, propaganda feeds. The data painted a picture. This world was divided. An empire called Britannia had conquered most of the planet. Japan had fallen 7 years ago. The territory had been renamed Area 11. The people had been stripped of their national identity and reclassified as numbers. Resistance movements existed. Terrorist cells, according to the official channels. Freedom fighters, according to the underground broadcasts. Standard occupation dynamics. Setsuna had seen variations of this pattern across a dozen conflicts. The details changed. The structure remained constant. Oppressor and oppressed locked in a cycle that fed itself. And now he'd inserted himself into that cycle, not by choice, not by design. But the moment he'd intervened to save those civilians, he'd taken a position whether he intended to or not. The military would classify him as a threat. The resistance would see him as potential leverage. The civilians would turn him into whatever they needed him to be. None of that mattered. What mattered was ending the fighting, cutting the war at its root. He'd done it before with celestial being. Armed intervention against armed intervention. Force applied with precision to make continued conflict impossible. But that required understanding the enemy. And here the enemy wasn't clear. A new contact appeared on his sensors. This one came from the north. No nightmare escort, no military transponder. Just a single encrypted transmission directed at his position. Setsuna opened the channel. "Good evening?" A male voice, cultured, amused. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. My name is irrelevant. My interest, however, is quite specific." Silence. "You've had a busy night. 1 white mobile suit, 6 disabled nightmares, 47 rescued civilians, 0 casualties. Impressive efficiency. The kind of efficiency that suggests training, purpose, an organization behind the operator. I work alone. Now, perhaps. But you didn't arrive here by accident. That technology, that combat doctrine, Someone built that machine. Someone taught you how to use it. The question is whether that someone is still invested in your survival. Setsuna's eyes narrowed. What do you want? An alliance? Temporary, mutually beneficial. You need information about this world's power structure. I need a variable that Britannia cannot account for in their strategic calculations. The voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. I can provide context, resources, tactical intelligence. In return, you provide uncertainty, the kind that makes empires hesitate. I don't serve political movements. Good. I'm not offering you a cause. I'm offering you efficiency. You want to end war. So do I. We simply have different methodologies. A pause. Think of it as division of labor. I handle the narrative. You handle the impossible. No, direct, admirable, inconvenient. The voice shifted registers. Let me rephrase. You are currently sitting in a crater in the middle of a military-controlled zone with damaged equipment and no extraction plan. Within 3 hours, Britannia will deploy heavy armor and aerial bombardment to neutralize you. Within 6 hours, this entire district will be leveled to ensure you don't escape. 47 people you just saved will die, along with 3,000 others. Setsuna said nothing. I can prevent that. One transmission, one redirect order. The military cordon can be loosened, not eliminated, just adjusted. Enough for you to relocate to somewhere you can actually repair your machine and plan your next move. In exchange for what? Simple acknowledgement. When I give you coordinates of civilian populations trapped in combat zones, you extract them. No questions, no political theater, just evacuation. The rest of your time is yours to spend however you see fit. Setsuna processed the offer. The terms were narrow, specific. No demands for military action, no requirement to engage hostile forces. Just extraction operations. The kind of work celestial being would approve. But the voice belonged to someone who understood manipulation. Someone who knew how to frame requests to sound reasonable. Saying yes meant entering a transactional relationship with an unknown actor who'd already demonstrated surveillance capability and tactical awareness. Saying no meant fighting alone against an enemy he didn't understand, with equipment running at 30% capacity. I'll extract civilians, nothing else. Agreed. A coordinate package will be transmitted to your system within the hour. Encrypted. Self-deleting after review. Use it or ignore it. Your choice. The voice paused. One more thing. The red nightmare you encountered. The pilot was correct. People will try to make you a symbol. Resist that impulse. Symbols are easier to kill than soldiers. Stay undefined, stay unpredictable. It's the only advantage you have in a world where everything else is already scripted. The channel closed. Setsuna sat in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls. Around him, Shinjuku burned in patches. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance. Somewhere above, satellites repositioned to keep visual lock on his position. He'd arrived in this world 63 minutes ago. In that time, he'd disabled 6 military units, evacuated 47 civilians, and entered into a temporary arrangement with someone who spoke like a chess player 3 moves ahead of the board. None of it brought him closer to returning home, but all of it confirmed one fundamental truth. This world's war machine was still running. Still grinding people between gears. Still pretending the violence served some higher purpose. Setsuna's jaw tightened. He'd ended wars before. He could end this one. The twin drive system pulsed in its locked state. Restricted output. Compromised synchronization. But still functional. Still capable of cutting through the machinery of conflict. All he needed was time to understand the battlefield. And time apparently was something the voice on the transmission had just purchased for him. Setsuna activated the Gundam's mobility systems. The machine rose from the crater with minimal particle emission. Stealth wasn't possible at this scale, but he could minimize his profile. reduce tracking efficiency. He selected a heading away from the heaviest military concentrations and began moving through Shinjuku's ruins. Each step calculated, each turn deliberate. Behind him, the crater cooled. The disabled nightmares remained where they'd fallen. Their pilots would be extracted within the hour. Debriefed. Their reports would enter the system and propagate through command channels. By morning, every Britannian officer in Area 11 would know about the white machine. The unknown threat. The variable that didn't fit established threat matrices. They would call emergency meetings, revise tactical doctrines, allocate resources to solve the problem he represented. All of that would take time. And while they planned and debated and recalculated, Setsuna would learn. He would watch. He would understand how this world's war functioned. And then he would end it. The Gundam disappeared into the darkness between buildings. Its footsteps faded. The GN particle emission dimmed to near invisibility. Above Tokyo settlement surveillance systems tracked the white machine as long as they could. Then it slipped into a sensor dead zone and vanished from their screens. Operators stared at empty monitors, officers demanded explanation. Analysts began writing reports that would be obsolete before they reached decision-makers. In the military command center, a general looked at the last known position and made a note in the margin of his tablet. One word. Underlined twice. Unclassified. Somewhere in the dark, a figure in a mask watched surveillance footage of the white mobile suit and smiled behind red-tinted glass. Everything was proceeding as calculated. Almost everything. The variable had arrived early. The timing would require adjustment. But variables, by definition, created opportunities as much as complications. The question was whether this particular variable could be guided, shaped, utilized, or whether it would need to be destroyed. Either outcome served the plan. The difference was simply one of efficiency. The masked figure closed the footage and opened a new communication channel. Orders needed to be given. Pieces needed to move. War required direction, narrative, control. And control properly applied could turn even the impossible into something useful. The transmission went out, encrypted, untraceable. Across Tokyo settlement, people who served causes they didn't fully understand received their instructions and began to act. The war continued, as it always had, as it always would, until someone cut it at the root. Deep in Shinjuku's ruins, Setsuna F. Sei ran system diagnostics and waited for dawn. War wouldn't end tonight, but it would end. That was the only certainty he needed. The coordinate package arrived at dawn. Setsuna had relocated the Gundam to an abandoned industrial complex in the southeastern quarter of Shinjuku. The structure had been a manufacturing plant before the war. Now it was steel bones and broken windows, large enough to provide minimal cover, isolated enough to avoid immediate civilian exposure. He sat in the cockpit reviewing the encrypted file. 3 locations, each marked with civilian population estimates and threat level assessments. The data was precise, too precise for satellite imagery alone. Someone had eyes on the ground, human intelligence, an organized network. The first location showed 83 civilians trapped in a subway tunnel. Britannian forces had sealed both ends to contain suspected resistance fighters. No food or water for 36 hours. Estimated time before critical casualties, 4 hours. Setsuna studied the tactical overlay. Heavy military presence, 6 nightmare frames on station, artillery support within range. Any extraction would require engagement. He closed the file and returned to the twin drive diagnostics. Synchronization remained locked at 30%. He'd attempted minor adjustments during the night. Each attempt triggered safety protocols that shut down his modifications before they could take effect. The drives were protecting themselves. Smart design, inconvenient reality. Full capability would require external support. Equipment he didn't have. Knowledge of local technology he hadn't acquired. Time he couldn't spare. A new transmission broke through his security protocols, not the same frequency as the voice from last night. This one came through visual feed. A live connection request. The source encryption was military grade, but routed through 17 proxy servers. Someone who understood operational security. Setsuna accepted the connection, the screen filled with a figure in a mask. Black and red. Ornate. Theatrical. The design suggested aristocracy filtered through revolutionary aesthetic. Behind the mask, a voice modulator smoothed away, identifying characteristics. "Good morning. I trust you found accommodations adequate for your needs." Setsuna said nothing. Direct as ever? Admirable. The masked figure tilted its head. "I am Zero, leader of the Black Knights, the organization dedicated to liberating Area 11 from Britannian oppression. You've likely encountered evidence of our work. The resistance movements, the strikes against military infrastructure, the rather persistent thorn in the Empire's side. You sent the coordinates. I did. A gesture of goodwill. Proof that our interests align more than diverge." Zero's hands clasped behind his back. "Those civilians in the subway. The Britannian forces have no intention of allowing them to leave alive. In 6 hours, they'll flood the tunnel. Call it a tragic accident. Blame the terrorists. Control the narrative. And you want me to extract them. I want you to save them. There's a difference. Extraction implies logistics, planning, coordination with existing forces." Zero leaned forward slightly. "I'm asking you to simply do what you did last night. Intervene. Neutralize the military presence without excessive casualties. Create an opening for evacuation. Then leave. Why not use your own forces? Because my forces operate within a specific framework. We are the heroic rebels fighting against impossible odds. Our victories must appear earned through cunning and sacrifice. If we deploy overwhelming force, we become indistinguishable from the empire we oppose." The mask caught the light. "You, however, exist outside that framework. You are undefined, unclassifiable. When you appear, both sides must recalculate. That uncertainty is more valuable than any weapon." Setsuna processed the logic. It was sound from a strategic perspective. A third party created complications that benefited the weaker force in asymmetric warfare. Standard insurgency doctrine. "I'm not your weapon." "No, you're not." Zero's tone shifted. "You're something far more interesting. You're proof that the framework can be broken, that the script can be interrupted. Britannia controls this conflict through superior technology and information dominance. You invalidate both advantages. That makes you the most dangerous variable in Area 11. Dangerous to everyone. Precisely, which is why I'm not trying to recruit you. I'm trying to establish parameters for coexistence." Zero gestured to something off-screen. "You will intervene when civilians are threatened. That's your nature. I observed it last night. You didn't hesitate, didn't negotiate, didn't demand explanations. You simply acted. War should end. A noble sentiment? Ultimately meaningless without methodology." Zero's voice carried the cadence of someone constructing an argument in real time. War ends when continuation becomes more costly than surrender. When the machinery breaks down. When the narrative justifying violence collapses. Setsuna's hands remained still on the controls. "You're building a narrative. I'm rewriting one. Britannia's story is conquest as civilization. Their script has been running for decades. Breaking it requires demonstrating that their version of reality is constructed, fragile, vulnerable. And I'm your disruption. You're a disruption. Whether you're mine depends entirely on whether you accept the coordinate packages I send." Zero paused. "I won't pretend to understand your ultimate goals. Your technology suggests origins far beyond anything currently deployed in this conflict. Your combat doctrine indicates training in asymmetric intervention. You're either a weapon that escaped its handlers, or a soldier who lost his war. Neither. Then what are you? Setsuna met the mask's empty gaze through the screen. Someone who cuts war at the root. Silence held for 3 seconds. Ambitious, impractical, impossible. Zero's head tilted. I like it. The sheer audacity of the statement. Most people claim they want peace. You claim you'll end war itself. The difference is fascinating. I've done it before. Have you? Then why are you here if you've truly ended war? Why does it still exist in whatever place you came from? The question landed without accusation. Pure curiosity. Or perhaps what you ended was merely one war, one conflict, one iteration of violence, and the pattern itself continued. Setsuna said nothing. The observation was accurate. Celestial being had intervened in armed conflicts, had forced nations to abandon military solutions, had created conditions where dialogue replaced destruction. But war, as a concept, hadn't ended. It had adapted, evolved, found new expressions. Zero seemed to read the silence correctly. Exactly. War isn't a problem to be solved. It's a pattern to be disrupted. And disruption requires understanding the system you're breaking. Zero's voice dropped half an octave. Which brings us back to the coordinates. The civilians in the subway. You can save them. The question is whether you'll allow me to provide intelligence that makes the operation possible. I don't need permission. No. You need context. Troop deployments, patrol schedules, weak points in the cordon, evacuation routes that won't funnel civilians into secondary kill zones. Zero pulled up a tactical map. I can provide all of that. Real-time intelligence, updated as conditions change. In return, I ask only that you allow me to ensure the people you save actually survive the next 6 hours. The logic was sound. Operating without intelligence in hostile territory was inefficient. Casualties increased. Mission success decreased. Accepting the data didn't obligate him to anything beyond the immediate operation. Send the tactical package. Already done. Check your secondary buffer. Zero's posture relaxed slightly. One more thing. When you engage Britannian forces, avoid face-to-face conversations with their special assets. They have a preference for eye contact. Your helmet should protect you, but distance is safer than assumptions. Setsuna's eyes narrowed. Explain. Some weapons don't require triggers. Zero's tone suggested the conversation was over. Maintain tactical distance. That's all you need to know. Noted. Good. I'll monitor the operation from a safe distance. If complications arise, I may provide tactical updates. Feel free to ignore them. Most soldiers do. The mask tilted in what might have been amusement. One question before you go. Last night you told the pilot of the Red Nightmare that war needs to end. Do you actually believe that's achievable, or is it simply the lie you tell yourself to justify the violence? Setsuna's response came without hesitation. I don't lie to myself. Then you're either delusional or dangerous. Possibly both. Zero stepped back from the camera. The civilians in the subway have 3 hours and 40 minutes. I suggest you begin your approach soon. Britannian patrol schedules change at noon. The connection terminated. Setsuna reviewed the tactical package. Detailed. Accurate. Updated within the last 15 minutes based on metadata timestamps. Zero's intelligence network was extensive. Professional. The kind of capability that required significant resources and organizational structure. This wasn't a scattered resistance movement. This was coordinated insurgency with strategic planning and information dominance in specific operational areas, which made Zero's apparent willingness to share intelligence either genuine cooperation or a sophisticated manipulation designed to position the Gundam as a Black Knight's asset without formal alliance. Setsuna didn't care which. The civilians needed extraction. The operation was viable. Everything else was noise. He activated the Gundam's mobility systems and began the approach to the target location. The route took him through Shinjuku's industrial sectors. Minimal civilian presence, lower military patrol density. He moved between buildings like a ghost. GN particle emissions kept to minimum viable levels. Stealth at this scale was impossible, but he could reduce detection probability. The tactical package updated twice during transit. Patrol rotation adjustments. One nightmare frame redeployed to a different sector. Zero's intelligence network was tracking military movements in real time. Setsuna filed the observation for later analysis and continued toward the subway entrance. He arrived at the perimeter with 40 minutes remaining before the scheduled patrol change. 6 nightmare frames on station, 2 at each entrance, 2 on roving patrol. Standard containment formation. The Gundam took position behind a derelict apartment complex, 400 meters from the nearest entrance. Setsuna studied the tactical overlay and calculated firing solutions. A flicker of red crossed his peripheral sensors. Rooftop. 300 meters northeast. Gone before he could track it. Someone was watching. Measuring. Not military. Different signature. The observation lasted 3 seconds. Then nothing. Whoever it was had left no trace beyond movement. Setsuna filed the data and returned to firing solutions. Non-lethal engagement. Disable mobility first. Weapons second. Minimize collateral damage to surrounding infrastructure. Create an extraction window of approximately 3 minutes. Sufficient time for 83 civilians to evacuate if they moved immediately. His finger moved to the trigger. A new transmission interrupted the firing sequence. Zero's channel. Audio only. 1 adjustment. The northern entrance has a sniper positioned in the building across from the nightmare stations. He's targeting the tunnel exit. Any civilians who emerge will be cut down before they reach open ground. Setsuna pulled up enhanced visual on the indicated building. 3rd floor. Eastern window. Heat signature consistent with human operator and high-caliber rifle. Why wasn't this in the tactical package? He arrived 7 minutes ago. My network isn't omniscient, just very good. Zero's voice carried no apology. I can have him neutralized by my people, but it will take 4 minutes. Your operation will be compromised. Setsuna adjusted his firing solution. I'll handle it. The range is 600 meters. Your weapon's precision at that distance, with a human target, the GN sword fired once in rifle configuration. The particle beam crossed the distance before the sniper could register movement. It struck the rifle's barrel dead center. The weapon superheated and fell from the operator's hands. The man stumbled backward, unhurt but disarmed. It is apparently exceptional. Zero's tone shifted to something almost like appreciation. Proceed. Setsuna fired 6 more times in rapid succession. Each shot targeted a nightmare frame's primary weapon system. Assault rifles deformed and dropped. Slash Harkins severed at the mounting points. The machines stood intact, but combat ineffective. The roving patrol attempted to engage. Setsuna put particle beams through both units' leg joints before they completed their targeting locks. Clean cuts, structural compromises, no explosions. 8 seconds, 6 disabled nightmares, 1 neutralized sniper, 0 casualties. The Gundam stepped into the open and approached the northern entrance. Setsuna opened an external speaker channel. Evacuate now. You have 3 minutes. The tunnel entrance was silent for 5 seconds. Then movement. Civilians emerging in groups, frightened, exhausted, moving as fast as physical condition allowed. Setsuna positioned the Gundam between the evacuation route and the disabled military units. A physical barrier. Insurance against any pilot desperate or foolish enough to attempt continued engagement with a damaged machine. One tried anyway. A Sutherland's pilot panicked or zealous triggered his emergency comm system. The transmission got halfway to artillery command before Setsuna severed the antenna mount with a precision shot. The beam melted through composite and wiring. The signal died mid-word. The other pilots watched 83 civilians flee across open ground toward the safe zones marked in Zero's tactical package. 2 minutes 40 seconds. The last civilian cleared the kill zone. Setsuna withdrew the Gundam back into the industrial sector. Behind him, Britannian reinforcements were already en route. Response time was improving. They were adapting to his operational patterns. Zero's channel opened again. Efficient. Clean. Exactly as projected. A pause. The civilians are being routed to safe houses. Medical attention, food, shelter. They'll survive. Good. I have 14 more locations. Similar situations. Trapped civilians. Military containment, inevitable casualties if no intervention occurs. Zero's voice carried the weight of a chess player watching pieces move into position. I can send you 1 coordinate per day. You extract the civilians. I ensure they survive afterward. Simple division of labor. Silence stretched between them. You're hesitating. Interesting. I expected either immediate refusal or automatic acceptance. The pause suggests you're actually considering the implications. Zero's tone sharpened. Let me make this easier. You don't trust me. Smart. I don't trust you. Equally smart. But we both want the same immediate outcome. Fewer dead civilians. The methodology and ultimate goals can remain separate. What do you gain from this? Exactly the right question. Zero sounded genuinely pleased. I gain proof that Britannia's control is conditional, that their military superiority can be challenged, that intervention from outside their framework is possible. Every civilian you save is a story that contradicts their narrative. Every operation you complete is evidence that their system has vulnerabilities. You're using them. I'm saving them. There's a difference. Zero's voice hardened. Those 14 locations, without intervention, 1,237 people will die in the next 3 weeks. I lack the military assets to extract them. The Black Knights operate within constrained parameters. We can't afford the casualties a direct assault would generate. But I can. You can afford to be direct because you're not invested in the political outcome. You save civilians and leave. No speeches. No flag planting, no recruitment drives. That makes you infinitely more effective than any force that needs to justify its existence through narrative. Setsuna processed the logic. It was clean, transactional, limited in scope. Accepting the coordinates didn't mean accepting Zero's ideology or goals. It simply meant acknowledging that Zero had intelligence resources that enabled more effective civilian extraction. Send the coordinates, 1 per day, nothing else. Agreed. And if you decide to terminate this arrangement at any point, simply stop responding. No obligations, no consequences. Zero paused. One last thing. You said war needs to end. I believe you mean that. But you should understand something about this world. War here isn't a failure of diplomacy. It's a tool of governance. Britannia doesn't fight wars to win territory. They fight wars to maintain the system that justifies their existence. Ending war here means dismantling an empire built on the assumption that conflict is the natural state of human organization. Then I'll dismantle it. The statement landed flat. No bravado, no emotion. Simple fact. Zero laughed. Not mockery. Something closer to genuine surprise. You might actually mean that. Incredible. The laughter faded. Good luck. You'll need it. Britannia has been perfecting the machinery of war for generations. They don't lose because they don't allow variables they can't control to exist long enough to matter. I've existed for 24 hours. Exactly my point. By their standards, you're already overdue for classification and neutralization. Zero's channel began to close. Watch for the pattern. They'll try to understand you first, define you, place you in a category that allows them to deploy appropriate countermeasures. When that fails, they'll escalate. And escalation here doesn't mean bigger guns. It means rewriting the rules until you're no longer a variable. The transmission ended. Setsuna sat in the cockpit and reviewed the operation data. 8 neutralized nightmares, 83 extracted civilians, no fatalities, mission success by any tactical metric. But Zero's final words carried weight that numbers couldn't capture. This world's war operated on principles beyond military force. Narrative, control, the appearance of inevitability. Celestial being had fought against nations, against military powers, against the assumption that armed conflict was an acceptable solution to political problems. Here, war itself was the system, the structure that organized society. Challenging it meant challenging not just armies, but the ideology that made those armies necessary. Setsuna's hands rested on the controls. The twin drive pulsed in its locked state. 30% capacity, enough to disable conventional forces, not enough to challenge an empire. He needed more time, more information, more capability. The coordinate package would provide the first 2: daily operations, daily intelligence, daily exposure to how this world's military functioned. The third requirement was more complex. Restoring the twin drive to full synchronization required either specialized equipment or a technological breakthrough he hadn't yet identified. But wars weren't won in a day. Celestial beings' interventions had taken years. Building the foundation for lasting change required patience and precision. Setsuna could be patient. The Gundam powered down to minimal emissions and settled into standby mode. Around it, Shinjuku continued its slow burn. Buildings collapsed, people hid. Military patrols swept through sectors looking for targets that fit their threat matrices. None of them were looking for what Setsuna actually represented. Not yet, but they would be soon. In a command center, 12 kilometers away, analysts reviewed footage of the subway extraction. They watched the white mobile suit neutralize 8 nightmare frames in 8 seconds without friendly casualties. They wrote reports, calculated probable origin points, estimated technological capabilities, recommended threat classifications. None of their recommendations included the word unclassifiable anymore. Now they were calling it Priority Alpha. Immediate threat. Maximum response authorization. The escalation had begun, exactly as Zero had predicted, and exactly as Setsuna had expected. War never changed its fundamental nature, only its tactics. The question was, who would adapt faster? The soldier who'd ended wars before, or the empire that had never lost one? The coordinate arrived 9 days after the subway extraction. Setsuna had spent that time learning the rhythm of Area 11's conflict. 8 operations, 312 civilians evacuated, 17 nightmare frames rendered combat ineffective. Not a single death attributed to his interventions. The pattern was becoming visible. Britannia's military doctrine relied on overwhelming force applied to contained populations. Seal the exits. Control information flow. Wait for surrender or eliminate resistance. Standard occupation protocol refined over decades of imperial expansion. Zero's intelligence network mapped those choke points with surgical precision. Each coordinate package identified civilians trapped in the machinery. Each operation exposed how deeply Britannia's control depended on narrative management rather than military superiority. This coordinate was different. Setsuna reviewed the tactical data in the industrial complex that had become his temporary base. The encryption took longer to parse. The file size was 3 times standard. When it finally opened, he understood why. Narita Mountains, 40 kilometers northwest of Tokyo settlement. Japanese Liberation Front stronghold under active assault by Britannian forces. Estimated civilian population in the combat zone 237. Trapped between advancing nightmare divisions and JLF defensive positions. The scale was wrong. This wasn't a sealed tunnel or isolated ghetto. This was an active military engagement between organized forces. Intervening meant entering a three-way conflict with contested territory and no clear extraction routes. A secondary file attached to the package. Audio only. Zero's voice. I know what you're thinking. This operation exceeds our established parameters. You're correct. But the civilians in Narita weren't trapped by accident. Cornelia Britannia is forcing a decisive battle. She's using the JLF as bait and the civilian population as leverage. When the battle concludes, that entire sector will be designated hostile territory. Everyone still alive will be reclassified as enemy combatants. Setsuna studied the terrain map. Mountain passes, dense forest, limited sightlines, nightmare favorable ground for both sides. Zero's voice continued. The Black Knights will intervene. We lack the strength to defeat Cornelia's forces directly, but we can create chaos, disrupt her formation, buy time for evacuation. Your role is simple. Extract the civilians while both armies are occupied with each other. No engagement with either force, unless absolutely necessary. The audio file ended. Setsuna ran probability calculations. The operation was viable if he maintained strict focus on extraction. Avoid the main battle. Target the gaps in the cordon. Move the civilians through terrain too broken for nightmare pursuit. But Zero's plan assumed the Black Knights could actually disrupt Cornelia's advance. If they failed, Setsuna would be extracting civilians through an active kill box, with enemy forces converging from multiple vectors. The tactical package updated. Real-time feed. Black Knights were already moving into position. Zero wasn't asking permission. He was informing Setsuna that the operation had already begun. Setsuna activated the Gundam systems and began the approach to Narita. The transit took 40 minutes at forced march speed. He avoided main roads and populated areas. GN particle emission stayed minimal. Detection probability remained acceptable. 3 kilometers from the combat zone, he picked up the first signs of battle. Artillery thunder rolling through the valleys. Smoke columns rising above the tree line. Communications chatter across multiple frequencies as Britannian units coordinated their advance. Setsuna positioned himself on a ridgeline overlooking the primary engagement area. Visual confirmation showed exactly what Zero's intelligence had promised. Cornelia's forces advancing in 3 prongs. Heavy nightmare presence. Gloucester-class frames in command positions. Artillery support staged in the rear. Textbook encirclement doctrine designed to collapse the JLF position and eliminate resistance in a single decisive action. The JLF held defensive positions deeper in the mountains. Lighter nightmares, guerrilla tactics, using terrain to offset Britannia's numerical and technological advantages, and caught between them clusters of civilian heat signatures scattered across the no-man's land. People who'd lived in these mountains before war turned their homes into battlefields. Setsuna identified 7 distinct groups. Largest concentration, 93 individuals sheltering in a valley between Cornelia's 2nd and 3rd prongs. The advance would overrun that position within 30 minutes. His tactical display lit up with new contacts. Black Knights entering the field from the eastern approach. Not a frontal assault. Flanking maneuver targeting Cornelia's supply lines and rear command positions. Zero's voice came through on a direct channel. We're committed. Cornelia will have to redirect forces to address our position. That's your window. 60 seconds after we engage, the cordon weakens. Get the civilians out. Understood. Setsuna watched the Black Knights' opening move. Coordinated strike against a supply convoy. 3 Britannian Sutherlands destroyed in the first exchange. Not disabled. Destroyed. The Black Knights were fighting to kill. The difference in doctrine was stark. Setsuna neutralized. Zero's forces eliminated. Cornelia's response was immediate. 6 nightmare frames peeled off from the main advance and redeployed to counter the Black Knights. The formation adjusted. Gaps appeared in the encirclement. Setsuna moved the Gundam down the ridgeline toward the largest civilian cluster. The terrain made it difficult. Steep slopes, dense undergrowth. The Gundam's mass required careful weight distribution to avoid triggering landslides. He descended at half-speed. Particle output carefully managed to maintain stability. Artillery fire screamed overhead. Britannian guns targeting JLF positions. The shells impacted 300 meters north. Close enough to feel the concussion. Not close enough to pose immediate threat. Setsuna reached the valley floor and approached the civilian shelter point. A collapsed logging facility. 93 people pressed into whatever cover the wreckage provided. The Gundam knelt. External speakers activated. Evacuation. Follow the designated route south. Move now. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then a woman stood. Then others. They emerged from cover and began moving south along the path Setsuna had identified in the tactical analysis. A new contact lit up his sensors. Britannia Nightmare. Gloucester class, coming fast from the western approach. Cornelia's personal unit. Setsuna's targeting system locked on. Firing solution calculated. But the Gloucester wasn't advancing on his position. It was tracking the Black Knight's movement through the eastern sector. She hadn't noticed him yet. The Gundam was running cold. GN emissions minimal. In the chaos of the larger battle, a single stationary contact might not register as priority threat. 93 civilians moved through the valley. Evacuation proceeding. 30 seconds to clear the immediate kill zone. The Gloucester stopped. Sensors swept the area. Cornelia had detected something. Setsuna watched her unit's posture shift. Combat-ready stance. She'd found him. The communication channel opened. A woman's voice. Authority and barely controlled fury. Unknown unit. Identify yourself immediately or be classified as hostile. Setsuna calculated engagement parameters. The Gloucester was advanced. Well piloted. Engaging would expose his position to every unit in the sector. The extraction would be compromised. But if he didn't respond, Cornelia would attack. The civilians were still in the valley. He opened the channel. Civilian evacuation in progress. Do not interfere. This is a military operation in hostile territory. All persons in this sector are subject to battlefield protocols. Cornelia's Gloucester raised its weapon. Withdraw immediately, or I will engage. The last civilian cleared the valley mouth. 20 meters into the southern pass. Outside Cornelia's direct line of fire. Setsuna fired first. The particle beam struck the Gloucester's rifle at the grip joint. The weapon separated and fell. Cornelia's unit stumbled back but recovered immediately. Her secondary weapons deployed. Slash Harkins launched. Setsuna cut them mid-flight. 2 precise shots. The Harkins fell short. You dare! He didn't let her finish. The next shot took out the Gloucester's right leg actuator. Not a clean cut. A precise strike to the knee joint that locked the limb without severing it. Mobility compromised, but repairable. Cornelia's unit went down on one knee. Still functional, still dangerous, but unable to pursue. Setsuna turned the Gundam south and followed the evacuation route. Behind him, Cornelia triggered her emergency beacon. Every Britannian unit in range would converge on her position. The response would be overwhelming, but the civilians were moving. And Setsuna was faster than any nightmare frame in Britannia's arsenal. The southern pass provided cover for 300 meters. Then the terrain opened into a second valley. Setsuna's sensors showed the evacuees moving in good order. No stragglers, no panic. The tactical overlay updated. Black Knights were withdrawing from their eastern position. Mission accomplished from their perspective. They had disrupted Cornelia's formation and survived the engagement, but 6 more civilian clusters remained scattered across the battlefield. Setsuna calculated extraction routes for each group. The math was brutal. He could reach 4 more groups before Britannia's response to Cornelia's beacon made further operations impossible. 2 groups would remain in the combat zone. 143 people he couldn't save. The calculation sat in his mind like broken glass. A new transmission. Zero's channel. I see you've drawn Cornelia's attention. Unfortunate but manageable. I'm transmitting updated rally points for the remaining civilians. The Black Knights will create diversions. You have approximately 6 minutes before this entire sector becomes untenable. 6 minutes. 4 groups. Aggressive timeline. Send the coordinates. The data arrived. Setsuna plotted the route. Feasible if he pushed the Gundam's current capability to maximum safe output. No margin for error. No time for precise engagement if he encountered resistance. He moved. The second group. 41 civilians sheltering in a ravine. Britannian patrol closing from the north. Setsuna intercepted the patrol at 300 meters. 4 Sutherlands. He disabled all 4 in 6 seconds. Weapons destroyed. Mobility systems compromised. Pilots alive but combat ineffective. The civilians evacuated, while the pilots sat in their crippled machines and watched. Third group. 38 people trapped in a village on fire. JLF and Britannian forces engaged in close combat 200 meters east. Setsuna ignored the battle and focused on extraction. The Gundam's hands provided shelter as the civilians moved through burning streets toward safe ground. Fourth group. 27 civilians pinned between artillery impact zones. Setsuna calculated firing solutions on the artillery batteries. 7 guns. Range 2,000 meters, elevated positions. He fired 7 times. Each shot struck an artillery piece's barrel or breech mechanism. The guns fell silent, not destroyed. Disabled. The civilians ran. Fifth group. 18 people hiding in a cave system. Britannian forces sweeping the area with incendiary rounds. Setsuna positioned the Gundam at the cave entrance and activated GN field at maximum output. The fire washed over the barrier and dissipated. The civilians emerged through the shield and ran south. 217 extracted, 20 remained. Time 5 minutes, 40 seconds since Cornelia's beacon. The 6th group was too far. Britannian reinforcements were already flooding the sector. Nightmares everywhere. Aerial units deploying. The window had closed. Setsuna stood on a ridge line and watched the last group's heat signatures disappear under advancing enemy positions. 20 people. The number carved itself into memory alongside every other calculation of insufficient capability. Zero's channel opened. Withdraw. You've done what was possible. The remaining civilians are beyond reach. They're still alive, for now. But mounting a rescue attempt means walking into a kill zone with every Britannian unit in the sector hunting you. You'll die. They'll die. The 217 you just saved will have died for nothing because Britannia will track them through the evacuation routes. The logic was sound. The calculation was correct. Withdrawing was the tactical choice that preserved the most lives. Setsuna hated it, but hate didn't change mathematics. He turned the Gundam south and withdrew from Narita. The evacuation routes led to Black Knight's safe houses, scattered through the lower mountains. Setsuna delivered the civilians to the first rally point and confirmed Zero's people were positioned to receive them. Then he withdrew to observation distance and watched. The Black Knights operated with practiced efficiency. Medical triage, food distribution, documentation. They processed 217 evacuees in 40 minutes and dispersed them to secondary locations before Britannian search patterns could establish tracking. Zero's organization wasn't improvised. This was institutional capability built over months or years, resources, training, infrastructure. Setsuna filed the observation and began the return transit to Tokyo settlement. The Gundam moved through the darkness between mountains. Behind him, Narita burned. The JLF position had collapsed. Cornelia's forces were conducting sweep operations. Artillery still thundered periodically. The battle would continue for hours, maybe days. But the civilians were out. Most of them. Setsuna's hands tightened on the controls. 217 saved, 20 lost. The ratio should have felt like victory. It felt like failure. By the time he reached the industrial complex, dawn was breaking over Tokyo's settlement. He powered the Gundam down and sat in the cockpit reviewing operation data. Total engagement time, 7 minutes, 12 seconds of direct action. Cornelia's Gloucester disabled. 9 Sutherlands neutralized. 7 artillery pieces rendered inoperable. 217 civilians extracted. 20 abandoned. His screen flickered. Incoming transmission, Zero's channel. Impressive work. Cornelia is furious. The military command structure is in chaos. You've demonstrated that their supposedly impregnable formation can be disrupted by a single operator with sufficient capability. A pause. The civilians are safe. The Black Knights are being credited with the rescue by the underground media. Your contribution will remain unacknowledged in official channels. I don't need acknowledgement. I know, which is why this arrangement works. Zero's tone shifted. But you should understand what you've actually accomplished today. You didn't just save 217 people. You proved that Britannia's military superiority is conditional. That their control can be challenged. Every person who hears about Narita will know that the Empire's strength has limits. 20 people are still in that combat zone. Silence held for 3 seconds. Yes, they are. And you couldn't save them. Zero's voice carried no judgment, just fact. You're going to encounter that calculation repeatedly. The math that says you can't save everyone. The choice between possible and impossible. Between strategic victory and tactical perfection. I've made those choices before. Then you know. The weight doesn't get lighter. You just learn to carry it. Zero paused. The question is whether you can continue making those choices without letting the weight break you. Setsuna didn't respond. Next coordinate will arrive tomorrow. Smaller operation, well within your capability. Something you can actually complete without leaving anyone behind. Zero's channel began to close. Rest. You've earned it. The transmission ended. Setsuna sat in the darkness and stared at the number. 20. It joined the other numbers. The other calculations of insufficient reach. The mathematics of war that no amount of capability could ever fully solve. But 217 were alive because he'd acted. That had to be enough. It had to be. The twin drive pulsed in its restricted state. Still locked at limited output. Still waiting for the technological breakthrough that would restore full capability. Still sufficient to cut through Britannian formations and extract civilians from impossible situations. Just not sufficient to save everyone. Setsuna closed his eyes and let the exhaustion settle into his bones. Tomorrow there would be another coordinate. Another group of trapped civilians. Another calculation of possible versus impossible. Tonight, 217 people would sleep in safe houses instead of burn zones. The math had to be enough. Across Tokyo settlement, Britannian command centers erupted into activity. Cornelia's report had reached every relevant decision-maker. The unknown unit had engaged a member of the imperial family, had disabled her nightmare and escaped without sustaining damage. Threat assessment protocols escalated again. Priority Alpha was no longer adequate. New classification, Priority Omega. Immediate elimination authorized, all assets committed. The hunt intensified. And in the underground networks, a different story spread. Whispers about a white machine that appeared at Narita and vanished like smoke. 217 people who'd been marked for death were alive. The Black Knights claimed credit publicly, but those who'd been there knew the truth. Something beyond the established players had entered the field. Something that didn't follow the script. Didn't respect the boundaries. Didn't care about the narrative. The civilians called it the White Guardian. Zero called it a useful variable. Britannia called it priority omega. Setsuna Fsaye didn't call it anything. He simply waited for dawn and the next set of coordinates. The conflict would continue. The mathematics would remain brutal. The choices would stay impossible. But armed conflict could still be cut. One extraction at a time. One operation at a time. One group of civilians pulled from the machinery before it could grind them down. The war wasn't over, but for 217 people, it had paused long enough for them to escape. That was something. It had to be something. The sun rose over Shinjuku's ruins. Another day, another calculation waiting to be made. The 14th coordinate arrived on schedule. Setsuna had fallen into a routine over the past 3 weeks. Dawn brought encrypted data. Tactical analysis followed. By mid-morning, he was moving toward whatever trap Britannia had set for people whose only crime was existing in the wrong location. The operations varied in complexity. Some required nothing more than creating an exit corridor. Others demanded precision dismantling of multi-layered cordons. But the fundamental pattern remained constant. Identify trapped civilians, neutralize containment forces, extract, withdraw. 389 people pulled from the machinery so far. 47 remained beyond reach. Today's operation would add 62 more to the saved column if he succeeded. The numbers accumulated like scar tissue. Today's coordinate pointed to Tokyo's settlement's industrial port district. 62 civilians trapped in a warehouse complex. Britannian forces conducting a sweep for suspected Black Knight sympathizers. Standard terrorize and control operation disguised as security enforcement. Setsuna reviewed the tactical package while running diagnostics on the twin drive system. The synchronization lock persisted. 3 weeks of attempted adjustments had yielded minimal progress. He'd managed to push output from the initial restriction to approximately 40% of full capability. Not through any technological breakthrough, just through careful manipulation of safety margins. It was insufficient. But it would have to suffice. The Gundam powered up and began transit to the port district. The route took him through Shinjuku's eastern industrial sectors. Abandoned factories and warehouses provided cover. He'd mapped 17 distinct paths through this area over the past weeks. Britannia knew he operated from somewhere in this general region. But the density of derelict structures made pinpoint tracking difficult. GN particle emissions stayed minimal. Thermal signature suppressed. The Gundam moved like a shadow through ruins that had once produced civilian goods and now produced nothing but hiding places. Setsuna reached the observation point 300 meters from the target warehouse. Visual confirmation showed 6 nightmare frames on station. Sutherland class. Standard patrol configuration, they'd sealed all exits and were conducting systematic sweeps of the interior. Civilians huddled in the warehouse's maintenance sublevel. Thermal imaging showed 62 heat signatures. No movement. They knew making noise meant being discovered. Setsuna calculated firing solutions. Straightforward operation. Disable the nightmares. Create an exit corridor. The civilians could evacuate north through a drainage system that connected to safe zones 2 kilometers distant. His targeting system locked on the first Sutherland. A new contact blazed across his sensors. Red signature. Fast. Coming from the southwest at combat speed. Setsuna's tactical display identified the unit. Guren. Custom Nightmare. Significantly more advanced than standard Sutherlands. Pilot classification, ace-level threat. The same red machine from Shinjuku 3 weeks ago. The Guren stopped 50 meters from Setsuna's position. Close enough to engage. Far enough to maneuver if the situation deteriorated. The communication channel opened. That same woman's voice. Sharp. Controlled fury barely leashed. So you're real. I was starting to think you'd already left. Or died. A pause. Zero said you'd keep operating. I wanted to see for myself. Setsuna said nothing. Still not a talker. Fine. I've got questions anyway. The Guren shifted stance. Combat ready, but not aggressive. Those operations over the past 3 weeks, Narita, the subway, every civilian extraction that embarrassed Britannia. That was you. All of you. The civilians were trapped, and you just happened to know exactly where they were, exactly when to intervene, exactly how to extract them without leaving a trail Britannia could follow. The Guren's sensors pulsed. You're working with Zero. He provides intelligence. You provide the impossible. Nice arrangement. The arrangement ends when civilians stop being used as weapons. That's naive. The voice carried an edge that cut. Britannia uses civilians as shields. The Resistance uses them as recruiting tools. Everyone in this conflict is using everyone else, including you. Zero's using you, whether you admit it or not. Zero provides coordinates. I decide whether to act. And you always act. Because that's your nature. You see people in danger, and you can't walk away. The Guren took one step closer, which makes you predictable. And predictability gets soldiers killed. Setsuna's targeting system tracked the Guren's movements. Weapons still holstered, posture aggressive, but not immediately hostile. The pilot wanted confrontation, but hadn't committed to violence yet. You came here to fight or to talk. Both, neither. I don't know yet. Frustration bled through the professional tone. You showed up at Narita, disabled Cornelia's personal unit, vanished before anyone could get a solid lock on your position. The entire Britannian command structure is losing their minds trying to classify you. And the Black Knights were trying to figure out if you're an asset or a problem. The Guren's right arm moved to its weapon mount. Not drawing, just ready. Zero says you're useful. I say you're dangerous. Not because of what you can do, because of what you represent. Explain. You don't need us. You don't need anyone. You just appear, do the impossible, and disappear. No speeches, no politics, no compromise. The voice hardened. That makes everyone else look weak by comparison. How are we supposed to inspire people to fight when there's a white machine that can solve problems we can't even approach? Setsuna processed the logic. The complaint was valid from a resistance movement perspective. His interventions created dependency, made organized resistance seem unnecessary, undermined recruitment and morale. Then stop sending me coordinates. We need those people saved. We just wish we could save them ourselves. A pause. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Those 62 civilians in the warehouse, they're not just refugees. They're families of Black Knights fighters. Britannia knows it. They're using them as bait. Setsuna's tactical analysis updated. If the civilians were bait, the visible nightmare presence was deliberately insufficient. The real trap would trigger when he engaged. Where's the actual force? Underground parking structure. 2 levels down. 12 Gloucesters, elite pilots. They're waiting for you to commit before they surface. The Guren's posture shifted slightly. I came to warn you, and to ask you to let us handle this one. You can't extract 62 people through an elite cordon. We'll take casualties, probably significant ones. But we'll get them out, and we'll do it without making the Black Knights look like we need a miracle machine to accomplish our objectives. The mathematics were clear. The Black Knights could potentially extract the civilians, but the cost would be steep. Multiple fighters dead or captured, equipment losses, tactical failures that would damage morale and operational capability. Setsuna could extract the same civilians with 0 friendly casualties and minimal resource expenditure. The efficient choice was obvious, but efficiency wasn't the only variable. How many of your people will die? Honestly, 8 to 12. Maybe more if things go badly. No hesitation in the answer. Pure tactical assessment. But they knew the risks when they joined. This is their fight. Their people. They deserve the chance to save their own families instead of waiting for you to do it for them. Setsuna's hands remained on the controls. The choice crystallized. Intervene and preserve Black Knight's capability at the cost of their agency. Or withdraw and accept casualties that could be prevented. In this conflict, even dignity carried a price tag. The mathematics screamed intervention. Something else whispered withdrawal. I'll create an opening. Your people extract the civilians. I cover the withdrawal. That's not... The Guren's pilot stopped, recalculated. You're compromising. I'm dividing the operation according to capability. I neutralize the elite force. You evacuate your people. Both objectives accomplished. Silence held for 3 seconds. You know that's not what I asked for. I know. But 8 to 12 deaths is unacceptable when another option exists. Setsuna's targeting system began plotting firing solutions on the underground structure. Prepare your extraction team. When the Gloucesters surface, I'll engage. You have 90 seconds to get the civilians out. And if I refuse, if I tell you to stand down and let us handle this our way, then I'll wait until your casualties reach critical levels and intervene anyway. This way wastes less time. The Guren's pilot made a sound that might have been laughter or fury or both. You're insufferable. You know that. The machine turned toward the warehouse. Fine. We'll do it your way. But this doesn't make us even. This makes us more indebted. And I hate owing people. You don't owe me anything. That's what makes it worse. The Guren's communication channel stayed open. I'm Kallen. Kallen Kozuki. If you're going to keep saving my people, you should at least know what to call me. Setsuna considered the question. Names created connections. Connections created complications. But withholding the information served no tactical purpose. Setsuna F. Seiei. Setsuna. Kallen tested the name. All right. Let's see if you're as good as the legends say. The Guren moved into position near the warehouse entrance. 3 minutes later, Black Knight's forces emerged from concealment. 8 Burai Kai frames. Well coordinated. They approached the warehouse in a tactical formation that suggested extensive training. The Britannian Sutherlands reacted immediately. But they were outnumbered and had been positioned as bait, not as a serious defensive force. The Black Knights engaged and pushed through. Underground, Setsuna's sensors detected movement. The Gloucesters were surfacing. 12 units. Elite configuration. They emerged from the parking structure's vehicle ramps and immediately moved to intercept the Black Knights. Setsuna fired. The first particle beam struck the lead Gloucester's sensor array. The unit went blind. The second shot took out another Gloucester's weapon before it could achieve target lock. The third disabled mobility systems on a machine attempting to flank Kallen's position. 3 shots. 3 Gloucesters, combat ineffective. The remaining 9 adjusted formation and attempted to locate the firing position. Setsuna had already displaced. The Gundam moved through the industrial structures using terrain masking. His next firing position gave clear lines on 4 more targets. 4 more shots. 4 more Gloucesters reduced to immobile obstacles. The Britannian elite pilots were adapting. They'd identified his general position and were attempting to coordinate a counterstrike. Slash Harkins launched toward his location. Artillery requests went up the chain. Setsuna displaced again. The Harkins struck empty space. By the time artillery authorization arrived, he'd moved 200 meters east. 5 Gloucesters remained operational. They were pulling back, trying to regroup and establish defensive positions that would make his surgical strikes more difficult. Kallen's voice cut through the tactical channel. Civilians are out. 62 confirmed. We're withdrawing. Acknowledged. Setsuna put particle beams through the remaining Gloucester's leg actuators. Mobility kills. Repair would take hours. Pursuit was impossible. 12 elite nightmares neutralized. No casualties. The Black Knight's extraction team was already moving the civilians through the drainage system toward safe houses. Mission accomplished. Setsuna began his own withdrawal. The Gundam moved north through the industrial sector, sensors tracking for pursuit. Britannia's response forces were converging, but he'd timed his displacement to stay ahead of their reaction curve. 300 meters into the withdrawal, the Gurren appeared alongside him, matching pace, not blocking his path. Just present. Callan's voice came through private channel. That was instructive. You fight like you're performing surgery. Precise. Minimal force, maximum effect. Efficiency reduces casualties. It also reduces drama. Zero would have made that encounter into theater. You just made it disappear. A pause. Is that what you did before this, before you showed up in our world? I ended armed conflicts. Forced warring parties to negotiate instead of fight. How'd that work out? The question landed harder than it should have. The pattern continued. Violence found new expressions. Different conflicts. Same fundamental problem. So you're here doing the same thing again. Trying to cut violence at its source. Callan's tone shifted. What happens when you realize this world's violence doesn't have a source, that it's distributed through every system, every choice? Every person who's decided that force is an acceptable solution. Then I cut the systems that enable force, one operation at a time. That's going to take a while. Yes, they moved in silence for 200 meters. Then Callan spoke again. The radiant wave surger. That's the Gurren's primary weapon. Microwave-based radiation designed to disrupt armor integrity and energy screens. I've been wondering if it would affect whatever keeps your machine so resistant to damage. Setsuna's tactical awareness sharpened. The question wasn't academic. You're asking if you could fight me. I'm asking if your invincibility has limits. There's a difference. The Gurren sensors pulsed. Because if you're truly unbeatable, then everything we're doing is pointless. The resistance, the fighting, all of it. We're just waiting for you to save us. I'm not invincible. The machine has vulnerabilities. Name one. Setsuna considered operational security against the value of honest engagement. Callan wasn't an enemy. She was a soldier fighting the same system he was targeting. Maintaining absolute information supremacy served no purpose. Energy feedback through specific frequencies can disrupt the GN particle field synchronization. Sustained interference could compromise defensive capability, so the radiant wave could hurt you. Potentially, if applied correctly and sustained long enough to overcome adaptive compensation. Callan was quiet for 10 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice carried something that might have been respect. You just told me how to kill you. Why? Because you needed to know you weren't helpless. That effort matters. That your capability has value beyond what I can provide. Setsuna's hands remained steady on the controls. Invincibility creates dependency. Vulnerability creates partnership. That's either brilliant or suicidal. Both, usually simultaneously. The Gurren pulled ahead slightly, then stopped. Callan positioned her machine to face the Gundam directly. I still don't trust you. You're too effective, too clean, too perfect. Nobody fights like you without having something broken inside that makes the violence easier. Setsuna didn't respond. The observation was accurate. But I respect what you're doing, even if I hate needing it. Callan's machine turned south. Next time Zero sends you coordinates, remember something? Those aren't just numbers on a screen. Those are people we failed to protect. Every civilian you save is a reminder that we're not strong enough, not smart enough, not fast enough. Then get stronger, smarter, faster. We're trying, but there's only so much cunning and sacrifice can accomplish against an empire with infinite resources and no moral limits. The Gurren began moving away. Keep saving people, Setsuna. Just don't expect us to thank you for it. The communication channel closed. Setsuna watched the red machine disappear into the urban maze. Then he continued his own withdrawal toward the industrial complex. The operation had been successful by every tactical metric. 62 civilians extracted, 12 elite nightmares neutralized. Black Knights maintained operational capability, no friendly casualties. But Callan's words sat in his mind like shrapnel. Every civilian you save is a reminder that we're not strong enough. The problem wasn't just Britannia's oppression. It was the Resistance's inadequacy. Zero's intelligence network could identify trapped civilians, but lacked the force projection to extract them. The Black Knights had courage, but insufficient capability to challenge elite units. Setsuna was filling the gap. But gaps once filled became dependencies. Dependencies became structural weaknesses that collapsed when the supporting element was removed. If he continued operating as the solution, the Resistance would never develop into a force capable of functioning without him. And when he eventually left this world, if he could repair the quantum drive system and return home, the pattern would simply reassert itself. The civilians would be trapped again. The Black Knights would be inadequate again. Britannia would win through attrition and superior resources. His intervention was treating symptoms, not addressing the disease. Setsuna reached the industrial complex and powered the Gundam down. He sat in the cockpit reviewing the tactical data from the engagement. Radiant Wave Surger. Callan had mentioned it specifically, asked if it could affect his defensive systems. She'd been probing for weaknesses, not to attack him, to understand him. To measure the gap between what he could do and what her forces could do. The question was whether that gap could be closed. Setsuna pulled up technical data on Sakuradite and local energy systems. The Guren's radiation manipulation suggested sophisticated understanding of energy field interactions. If the Black Knights had that level of technical capability, they might be able to develop countermeasures to Britannian advantages. But they lacked time, resources, safety to conduct research and development. Setsuna stared at the data and considered possibilities. The twin drive system was still running on restricted output. The local power infrastructure used Sakuradite-based generation. Incompatible technologies from different developmental paths. But energy was energy. Particles were particles. Synchronization was mathematics. What if he could use local resources to stabilize the twin drive, not as a replacement for GN drives, as a supplement? A temporary patch that would let him push output higher while working toward full restoration. The risk was significant. Introducing foreign elements into a quantum system could cause catastrophic desynchronization. But the current state was already catastrophic. Limited capability meant limited operations. Limited operations meant more civilians beyond reach. 47 people across 3 weeks who he couldn't save because he couldn't reach them fast enough or fight through heavy enough resistance with restricted output. The mathematics demanded better solutions. Setsuna began running simulations, integration protocols, feedback compensation, power distribution balancing. The data was promising, not guaranteed, but possible. He would need local technical expertise. Someone who understood Sakuradite energy systems well enough to help develop the integration architecture, which meant reaching out to the one organization in Area 11 with both the knowledge and the resources. The Black Knights. Callan had said they weren't strong enough, smart enough, fast enough. Maybe the solution was making each other stronger. Setsuna opened a communication channel to Zero's network and began drafting a message. It was a risk. Revealing technical needs meant revealing vulnerabilities. Asking for help meant admitting limitations. Creating dependencies meant accepting complications. But operating in isolation had a ceiling. He'd reached it. 3 weeks of maximum effort with restricted capability had saved 451 people and left 47 to die. Better solutions required better resources. Better resources required cooperation. The message was simple. Technical consultation required. Sakuradite energy integration. Compensation negotiable. He sent the transmission and waited. Across Tokyo, Settlement Zero received the message and smiled behind the mask. The variable was evolving, recognizing limitations, seeking optimization. Perfect. Everything was proceeding exactly as calculated. Almost everything. Variables by nature refused to stay completely predictable, but that was what made them valuable. The announcement came through official channels on a Tuesday morning. Princess Euphemia Lai, Britannia, 3rd Princess of the Holy Britannian Empire and Sub-Viceroy of Area 11, was establishing a special administrative zone of Japan. A territory where Japanese people could reclaim their name, their identity, their dignity. Setsuna watched the broadcast from the industrial complex. The princess spoke with conviction that seemed genuine. No apparent cynicism, no visible manipulation. Just a young woman trying to create something better than the system she'd inherited. Zero's network went silent for 6 hours. When the encrypted channel finally opened, Zero's voice carried an edge Setsuna hadn't heard before. Something raw beneath the theatrical precision. It's a trap. It has to be. Britannia doesn't surrender power voluntarily. This is Euphemia being used as bait for a larger operation. Or it's genuine. Nothing Britannia does is genuine. Everything is calculation. Everything is control. Zero's mask couldn't hide the tension in his voice. If the SS succeeds, it destroys the resistance narrative. Why fight for freedom when the Empire offers it freely? The entire foundation of the Black Knights collapses. Setsuna processed the logic. Zero's assessment was tactically sound from a revolutionary perspective. A peaceful resolution undermined the justification for armed resistance. But that didn't make the essays inherently false. What will you do? Silence held for 10 seconds. I'm going to the opening ceremony, to observe, to verify. Zero's tone shifted. If this is real, I'll adapt. Find another path. If it's a trap, I'll expose it before it can spring. And if it's something in between, then we're all about to learn something unpleasant about good intentions in a corrupt system. The channel began to close. No coordinate today. The civilians in Area 11 will either become Japanese citizens again or targets in a massacre. Either way, your intervention won't change the outcome. The transmission ended. Setsuna sat in the cockpit and considered the variables. A peaceful resolution would eliminate the immediate need for his operations. The civilians would have legal protection. The fighting would de-escalate. Britannia's oppression would become conditional, negotiable. It was the outcome celestial being would have defined as success. Armed intervention, creating conditions for dialogue. Violence becoming unnecessary. But Zero's warning persisted. Nothing Britannia does is genuine. Setsuna reviewed intelligence on Euphemia Lee Britannia. 3rd Princess, Sub-Viceroy. No military command experience. Publicly known for idealism and naivety about political realities. She'd advocated for gentler occupation policies, had opposed violence when other options existed. Either she was legitimately trying to reform the system from within, or she was being used as the unknowing instrument for something darker. The data couldn't resolve the ambiguity. Setsuna made a decision. He would observe the ceremony. Position the Gundam at tactical distance. If violence erupted, he could intervene. If the essays proved genuine, he could withdraw and reassess his operational mandate. The ceremony was scheduled for the following day. Location: a coastal plateau 40 kilometers south of Tokyo settlement. Open ground, minimal cover, deliberately chosen to prevent military staging or ambush tactics. Setsuna spent the night running scenarios. Extraction routes, firing solutions, evacuation corridors, planning for a disaster he hoped wouldn't materialize. Dawn arrived. The Gundam moved south under minimal emissions. He positioned on a ridgeline 3 kilometers from the ceremony site. Visual range, long enough to avoid immediate detection. close enough to respond if the situation deteriorated. Thousands of people gathered on the plateau. Japanese civilians, drawn by the promise of reclaimed identity. Euphemia stood on a platform with Britannian officials and Black Knight's representatives. Zero was there, masked, maintaining the performance even in this improbable moment. Setsuna watched through enhanced optics. The speeches began. Euphemia spoke about reconciliation, about moving beyond cycles of violence, about creating a future where Japanese and Britannian could coexist as equals within the empire's structure. The crowd listened, some skeptical, many hopeful, all desperate for something better than the grinding oppression of the past 7 years. Zero approached the platform, a gesture of cooperation, of conditional acceptance. The two figures spoke. The conversation appeared civil, almost optimistic. Then something changed. Setsuna's sensors picked up the shift before his eyes processed it. Euphemia's body language altered. Her speech patterns became erratic. She was saying something to Zero, something urgent, distressed. Zero stepped back. His posture shifted from negotiation to defensive readiness. Euphemia turned to the Britannian forces, gave an order. The words carried across the plateau through amplified speakers. All forces, eliminate the Japanese. For 1 second, nobody moved. The order was so incongruous with everything that had preceded it that human brains refused to process the command. Then the Britannian soldiers opened fire. The crowd panicked. People ran in every direction. Nightmare frames activated and began advancing into the civilian mass. Systematic, methodical, executing an order that made no tactical sense but carried absolute authority. Setsuna was moving before conscious thought engaged. The Gundam descended the ridgeline at forced march speed, 3 kilometers. The terrain limited his velocity. He pushed the GN drive output to maximum safe parameters, 43% capability, higher than he'd sustained before. The risk of damaging the synchronization was significant. The risk of thousands dying while he moved carefully was unacceptable. 2 kilometers. Gunfire echoed across the plateau. Screams. The sound of nightmare frames crushing anything too slow to escape their path. 1 kilometer. Setsuna's targeting system began identifying priority threats. Nightmares advancing into the heaviest civilian concentrations. Artillery pieces being repositioned to fire into the fleeing crowds. He broke through the perimeter at full speed and opened fire. The first beam struck a Sutherland that had cornered 40 civilians against a concrete barrier. The shot severed the Nightmare's arm at the shoulder joint. The machine stumbled sideways. The civilians ran through the gap. Second shot, third, fourth. Setsuna fired continuously while moving through the massacre site. Each beam targeted a different threat. Nightmares disabled. Artillery pieces rendered inoperable. Soldiers too close to civilians for precision engagement got particle beams through their weapons instead of their bodies. But he was one machine against an organized military operation. The plateau was too large, the civilian population too dispersed. Britannian forces too numerous. He couldn't stop it, only disrupt it. Setsuna established a defensive corridor along the eastern edge of the plateau. A line of disabled nightmares and destroyed weapons that created a gap in the encirclement. Civilians who reached that corridor could flee toward the evacuation routes. Hundreds made it through, maybe 1,000. Thousands more didn't. The Britannian forces adapted, concentrated their fire, called in aerial support, began targeting the Gundam directly instead of pursuing fleeing civilians. Setsuna's tactical display showed deteriorating conditions. GN drive temperature rising, synchronization stability declining. He was sustaining combat intensity beyond safe operational parameters. The drives were threatening to lock again if he didn't reduce output. But reducing output meant fewer shots, fewer disabled threats, more dead civilians. He pushed harder. A Gloucester-class frame emerged from the Britannian formation. Advanced weaponry, moving with precision that suggested an elite pilot. It fired directly at Setsuna's position with a weapon he hadn't encountered before. The projectile struck the Gundam's left shoulder. Not a particle beam, something solid, high velocity. The GN field absorbed most of the impact, but feedback rippled through the system. Warning indicators flashed across his display. The Gloster fired again. Setsuna displaced, but the second shot clipped his right leg. More feedback. The GN field was being tested by sustained impact in ways the unrestricted system could handle easily. But the current limited output struggled to compensate for. He couldn't maintain defensive operations and engage the Gloster simultaneously. The choice was immediate and brutal. Hold the corridor or eliminate the elite threat. Setsuna held the corridor. The Gloster fired 3 more times. Each shot stressed the field. Each impact drove synchronization stability lower. But the civilian evacuation continued. People were still running, still escaping through the gap he'd created. His tactical display showed critical warnings. Temperature exceeding safe limits. Synchronization approaching catastrophic failure threshold. Another 30 seconds at this output level, and the twin drive would lock completely. Possibly permanently. 20 seconds. The last visible cluster of civilians cleared the corridor. 10 seconds. Britannian forces were repositioning, closing the gap. If he withdrew now, some might still escape through secondary routes. 5 seconds. The Gloster lined up another shot. Setsuna triggered emergency shutdown protocols and displaced north at maximum speed. The Gundam disengaged from the combat zone with warning alarms screaming across every system. Behind him, the massacre continued. He retreated to the ridgeline and performed emergency diagnostics. Twin drive synchronization 18%. Critical damage. Output capability reduced to barely 20% of optimal. The drives had locked harder than their initial arrival state. He'd traded capability for lives. The mathematics were clear. Several hundred evacuated, several thousand dead. The ratio was unacceptable. Setsuna sat in the cockpit and watched smoke rise from the plateau. The Britannian forces continued their sweep for another 40 minutes. Then they withdrew, left the dead where they'd fallen, returned to base as if they'd executed a standard military operation instead of slaughtering unarmed civilians celebrating promised freedom. Zero's voice came through on emergency channel. Rough. Damaged in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury. Get out of the area. Britannia will classify this entire region hostile territory. They'll hunt anything that moves. Euphemia is dead. I killed her after she gave the order. Zero's voice carried an edge like broken glass. It was Geass, a power that controls minds. She didn't want this, but the power misfired, turned her command into something she never intended. And thousands died before I could stop it. Setsuna processed the information. Mind control. A weapon that required no physical component, that turned allies into enemies with a word. The eye contact warning. Yes. Line of sight weaponization. I should have been more explicit. Should have told you what Geass actually does. Should have... Zero stopped. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. The SAS is destroyed. The Japanese people will never trust Britannia again, and Euphemia's last act will be remembered as genocide. It wasn't her act. That won't matter to history. The narrative is already being written. Britannian princess orders massacre of Japanese civilians. Whether she meant it or not becomes irrelevant next to the bodies. Zero's voice hardened. Britannia will use this. They'll say it proves Japanese can't be trusted with autonomy, that the resistance incited violence, that stronger control is necessary for peace. Setsuna understood. The massacre would justify everything Britannia wanted to do. Increased oppression, expanded military operations, total suppression of resistance movements under the banner of preventing further violence. What will you do? What I have to. Take credit for the massacre. Claim the Black Knights planned it. Make Euphemia a martyr and myself the monster. Zero's tone suggested he'd already made calculations Setsuna couldn't follow. If Britannia controls the narrative, they win completely. If I control it, at least the Japanese people maintain their hatred of the Empire instead of turning it inward. That makes you responsible for thousands of deaths. I'm already responsible. I was there. I could have stopped it sooner. I could have... Zero's voice fractured. Recovered. Get your machine repaired. Hide. The response to this will be overwhelming. Britannia will deploy everything to eliminate resistance capability before we can exploit the anger this creates. The transmission ended. Setsuna sat in the damaged Gundam and watched the plateau. Emergency services were arriving. Medical teams, body recovery units. The machinery of processing mass death ground into motion. Several hundred saved, several thousand lost. The mathematics screamed failure. He'd pushed the twin drive beyond safe limits and accomplished almost nothing. The civilians who'd escaped did so through a corridor he'd held for minutes. But the massacre itself had continued unabated. Euphemia had died. Zero had claimed responsibility for genocide. The peaceful resolution had transformed into justification for expanded violence. Everything celestial beings' interventions were designed to prevent had happened anyway. Setsuna activated the Gundam's damaged systems and began withdrawal toward Tokyo settlement. The machine moved slowly, carefully. Every system stressed beyond designed parameters. The twin drive pulsed erratically. Synchronization indicators fluctuated between 18 and 22%. He'd sacrificed capability for a partial save. And even that sacrifice felt inadequate. The sun set over Area 11. In Tokyo settlement, Britannian command centers received reports of the SAZ massacre. In underground safe houses, Black Knights fighters learned their leader had claimed responsibility for mass murder. In refugee camps and ghettos, Japanese civilians processed the news that their promised freedom had been a trap. The narrative was already solidifying. Britannia spoke of tragic violence incited by terrorists. Zero spoke of deliberate rebellion against an unjust peace. The truth that a princess with good intentions had been turned into an instrument of slaughter by a power beyond her control existed only in the memories of those who had been present, and none of them would be believed. Setsuna reached the industrial complex after dark. He powered down the Gundam and sat in silence. The numbers repeated in his mind. Several hundred saved, several thousand dead. Insufficient, inadequate, failed intervention. His communication system activated. Incoming transmission, Zero's channel. I know what you're thinking. That you should have acted faster, saved more, done something differently. Zero's voice was steady now, controlled. The raw edges buried under tactical necessity. You're wrong. What happened at the SAS couldn't be stopped by firepower. It was a weapon that targets the mind, that turns allies into enemies, that corrupts good intentions into atrocities. I should have prevented it. How you didn't know Geass existed. You didn't know Euphemia was vulnerable. You responded the moment violence began and saved everyone you could reach. Zero paused, which is more than I did. I had the knowledge. I had the opportunity to prevent this, and I failed. Setsuna didn't respond. Shared guilt didn't reduce individual responsibility. The coordinate I'm sending tomorrow will be different. Not civilians trapped by military operations. Civilians displaced by the massacre. Refugees fleeing areas Britannia has designated hostile. Zero's tone shifted. You wanted to understand this world's conflict structure. Now you have. War here isn't fought with armies and territory. It's fought with minds and narratives, with powers that corrupt good people into doing terrible things. The Geass is one weapon among many, but it's the weapon that matters most, the one that makes traditional intervention insufficient. Zero's channel began to close. Get your machine repaired. Find whatever resources you need. The conflict just escalated beyond conventional parameters. You'll need full capability to operate in what comes next. The transmission ended. Setsuna sat in darkness and reviewed the technical data. Twin drive synchronization, 19%. Catastrophically insufficient. Repairs would require more than careful adjustment of local power systems. This damage needed fundamental restoration, which meant the Securidite integration couldn't be a temporary patch anymore. It had to become a genuine solution. A way to restore synchronization using available resources, since returning home to proper facilities remained impossible. He pulled up the technical schematics he'd been developing. Energy field harmonization, particle flow compensation, quantum stabilization using classical physics principles. The theory was sound. The implementation would be dangerous. But operating at 19% meant abandoning civilians he could save with higher output. Meant accepting casualties that full capability could prevent. The choice was clear. Setsuna opened a communication channel to Zero's network and sent a message. Securidite integration project requires immediate implementation. Need technical expertise and secure workspace. Timeline critical. The response came within minutes. Resources allocated. Location coordinates attached. Kyoto House has been persuaded to provide support. They want assurances you'll continue operations afterward. Setsuna reviewed the coordinates. A secured facility in the mountains west of Tokyo settlement. Isolated, defensible. Large enough to house the Gundam and whatever equipment the integration would require. Assurances provided. Operations continue until armed conflict ends. Good enough. Arrive within 24 hours. Technical team will be ready. Setsuna closed the channel and began preparing for transit. The damaged Gundam would barely make the journey. But it had to. Because the alternative was operating at 19%, while this world's conflicts spiraled into weapons that corrupted minds and turned peace into genocide. He'd come to this world to end war. Instead, he discovered war that didn't follow rules he understood, that operated on principles beyond military force, that weaponized the human mind itself. Traditional armed intervention was insufficient, so he would adapt, upgrade, restore capability, and learn how this world's deeper weapons functioned. Then he would cut them. The same way he cut conventional military operations. By finding the root and severing it with precision that left no room for continued function. Geass was a weapon. Weapons had sources. Sources could be eliminated. The Saz massacre was a tragedy. Thousands dead. A peaceful resolution destroyed. Good intentions turned into justification for atrocity. But it was also intelligence. Data about how this conflict actually operated beneath the surface violence. Setsuna had spent 3 weeks treating symptoms. Now he knew where the disease was hiding. And diseases once identified could be excised. The twin drive pulsed weakly in its damaged state. 19%. Barely enough to maintain basic systems. Insufficient for anything resembling effective intervention, but temporary. Within the week, he would restore capability. Within the month, he would understand the deeper weapons. Within whatever timeline the conflict demanded, he would find Geass's source and eliminate it. The war wasn't conventional. Fine. Neither was quantum teleportation or GN particle manipulation or any of the other impossible things the Gundam represented. Impossible just meant nobody had solved it yet. Setsuna F. Seiye specialized in solving impossible problems. This would be one more. The night deepened over Area 11. In the aftermath of massacre narratives hardened, Britannia prepared expanded suppression operations. The Black Knights processed their leaders' claimed responsibility for genocide. Japanese civilians mourned the death of hope. And in an industrial complex in Shinjuku, a soldier who'd ended wars before began planning how to end one that fought with weapons beyond bullets. The mathematics had failed today. Thousands dead, hundreds saved. Tomorrow the mathematics would improve. They had to. The facility was hidden in the mountains, 30 kilometers west of Tokyo settlement. Setsuna arrived at dawn with a machine barely capable of sustained operation. The Gundam moved carefully through narrow mountain passes, GN particle emissions fluctuating as the damaged twin drive struggled to maintain basic functionality. 19% synchronization. Every system stressed, every movement calculated to avoid catastrophic failure. The coordinates led to a converted mining complex built into the mountainside, large enough to accommodate mobile suits, remote enough to avoid casual observation, defended enough to discourage investigation. Kyoto House had provided more than just workspace. This was a fully operational research facility. Setsuna maneuvered the Gundam into the central hangar and powered down. The silence that followed felt heavier than usual. No ambient hum from properly synchronized drives. Just the irregular pulse of damaged quantum systems trying to maintain coherence. A figure waited in the hangar. Rakshata Chawla, chief scientist for the Black Knights. Her reputation preceded her through Zero's intelligence reports. Brilliant, unconventional, responsible for most of the technological advantages the Resistance possessed. She looked up at the Gundam with an expression that combined professional interest and barely concealed fascination. So, the miracle machine finally needs help. Her accent carried traces of multiple regions. Voice rough from what the report suggested was habitual smoking. Zero said you'd burned out your primary systems, saving people at the Seize. Foolish, but admirably consistent with your operational pattern. Setsuna descended from the cockpit via external ladder. Ground level felt strange after weeks of operating primarily from the pilot seat. Rakshata studied him with the same intensity she'd directed at the Gundam. Young. I expected someone older, more worn down by whatever conflicts produced a soldier who fights like surgical intervention. Age is irrelevant to capability. Spoken like someone who hasn't lived long enough to understand how accumulated trauma shapes tactical choices. She gestured toward a workshop area. But we're not here for psychological analysis. You need quantum drive synchronization restored using local resources. That's either brilliant or impossible. Possibly both. Setsuna followed her into the workshop. Technical equipment lined the walls, diagnostic systems, power regulation arrays, materials analysis stations. The setup was professional grade. Kyoto House had invested significantly in this facility. Rakshata pulled up holographic displays showing the Gundam's external scans. I've been reviewing the data Zero provided. Your machine operates on principles that shouldn't exist. Particle generation that violates known physics. Energy fields that respond to consciousness. Quantum systems that treat space-time as negotiable rather than absolute. The twin drive is based on GN particle physics, quantum mechanics applied to sustained energy generation and manipulation, which tells me exactly nothing useful. Rakshata magnified a section of the scan, showing the drive housing. But I can work with observable effects. Your synchronization problem is fundamentally an oscillation mismatch. Two quantum systems that should harmonize but are currently fighting each other. Classic resonance failure. She pulled up new displays. Sakura Dite energy signatures, harmonics analysis, field interference patterns. Sakura Dite-based systems operate on different principles than your GN particles. But both are fundamentally energy manipulation technologies. Both create fields. Both respond to precise frequency control. Rakshata's expression sharpened. The question is whether we can create a bridge. Use saccharidite field harmonics to force your quantum drives back into synchronization. The risk is catastrophic desynchronization. Introducing foreign field harmonics could collapse the quantum coherence completely, or it could provide the external stimulus your drives need to realign. Rakshata smiled. It wasn't a comforting expression. Either way, you're not operating effectively at 19%. The potential upside justifies the risk. Setsuna considered the logic. She was correct. Maintaining current capability meant accepting permanent inadequacy. Attempting the integration meant risking total failure. But total failure was preferable to prolonged insufficiency. How long? 3 days minimum. 5 if complications develop. 7 if the theory is completely wrong and we have to improvise entirely new approaches. Rakshata began pulling up technical schematics. I'll need complete access to your machine systems, diagnostic data, power flow architecture, field generation parameters, everything. Operational security is a concern I understand and am choosing to ignore. Rakshata met his eyes directly. You can trust me, or you can operate at 19% forever. Choose quickly. I have other projects. Setsuna made the calculation. Zero had vouched for her capability. The Black Knights had demonstrated reliable operational security across multiple engagements. And most importantly, he had no better options. Full diagnostic access authorized. Integration protocols to be reviewed before implementation. Acceptable. Rakshata turned toward the Gundam. Get some rest. You look like you haven't slept since the massacre. I'll begin preliminary analysis. We'll discuss integration architecture tomorrow morning. Setsuna watched her approach the Gundam with equipment in hand. She moved with the confidence of someone who understood machines at a fundamental level, who saw technology as conversation rather than tool. He turned toward the facility's barracks section. Sleep was necessary. The past 72 hours had been sustained crisis management with minimal rest. Exhaustion degraded decision-making, degraded performance. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time Setsuna closed his eyes, he saw the plateau. Thousands running, thousands falling. The gap between what he could do and what needed doing measured in bodies. He'd pushed the Gundam beyond safe limits and accomplished a partial save. Several hundred evacuated, several thousand dead. The mathematics remained brutal. And underneath the immediate tragedy, the revelation of Geass, a weapon that corrupted minds, that turned allies into enemies. That operated on principles his training hadn't prepared him to counter. Conventional armed intervention was insufficient against weapons that targeted human consciousness itself, which meant the conflict extended beyond military forces and territorial control. There was infrastructure, organization, source facilities for a weapon that required more than individual will to deploy. Setsuna had spent 3 weeks dismantling Britannia's tactical operations. Now he needed to understand their strategic depth. He opened his communication device and accessed Zero's intelligence network. Search parameters, Geass. Mind control. Consciousness manipulation. Historical precedents. Organizational structure. The network returned fragmented data. References to a research division. Code R. Experimental programs with high mortality rates. Facilities that appeared on no official records. Subjects who disappeared into black sites and emerged with capabilities that violated natural law. Setsuna compiled the information. The pattern was clear. Geass wasn't spontaneous. It was developed, refined, deployed through an organization that operated in Britannia's shadow. If he could locate that organization's facilities, he could gather intelligence, understand the weapon's limitations, identify vulnerabilities. And if those facilities contained active operations that harm civilians, He could intervene the same way he'd intervened against conventional military operations. Setsuna downloaded the fragmentary location data. 3 potential sites within operational range. 1 near Tokyo settlement. 2 in the Western territories. None confirmed. All circumstantial. But circumstantial was better than nothing. He set the search parameters to continue running background analysis and attempted sleep again. This time exhaustion won. Setsuna woke 6 hours later to the sound of equipment activation. Rakshata had begun diagnostic analysis. He could hear the Gundam system cycling through test sequences under external control. He found her in the hangar, surrounded by holographic displays showing power flow diagrams and quantum resonance patterns. Your machine is fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. Rakshata didn't look up from the data. The twin drive creates a feedback loop that amplifies particle generation exponentially. Elegant, efficient, completely unstable without perfect synchronization. And you've been running it damaged for 3 weeks. Capability was necessary. Capability at 19% is barely superior to our best nightmare frames. You sacrificed your primary advantage for marginal improvements. She pulled up a comparative analysis. At full synchronization, your machine could operate at output levels that make conventional forces irrelevant. At current degradation, you're just another ace pilot with better equipment. The civilians needed extraction. The civilians would have benefited more from you waiting until proper capability could be restored before conducting high-risk operations. Rakshata's tone carried no judgment, just tactical assessment. But you don't think like that. You see people in danger, and you act immediately. Consequences become tomorrow's problem. Setsuna didn't respond. The observation was accurate, and therefore required no defense. Rakshata gestured to the quantum resonance displays. The saccharidite integration is viable. Difficult, but achievable. We'll use harmonic field generators to create a stabilization matrix around both drives. Force them into resonance through external pressure. It's crude compared to proper quantum recalibration, but crude solutions that work are superior to elegant theories that fail. Timeline, 4 days, maybe 5. I'm fabricating custom field generators now. The harmonics have to be precise to within 0.003%, or we risk shattering the quantum coherence entirely. She pulled up fabrication schematics, which means you have 4 days of mandatory rest while I work. Use them productively, research something, develop new tactics, process whatever psychological damage the SAZ created. I don't need rest. Your exhaustion metrics suggest otherwise, but fine. If you want to be useful, investigate this. Rakshata transferred a data file to his device. Zero mentioned you were asking about Geass infrastructure. I've compiled what fragmentary intelligence exists on potential research facilities. None confirmed. All dangerous. If you're planning infiltration, coordinate with Zero first. The political implications of attacking Britannian research sites extend beyond tactical concerns. Setsuna reviewed the file. 3 locations. The data matched his own research with additional details. Security estimates, personnel counts, facility purposes based on resource allocation patterns. One site stood out. Mount Fuji Underground Complex. Classified as geological research. Actual purpose unknown. Resource consumption inconsistent with stated operations. Personnel transfers that suggested human experimentation. The profile matched Codar's operational security patterns. This one. Setsuna highlighted the Mount Fuji site. Can Zero provide detailed intelligence? Probably not. That facility is locked down tighter than military installations. But he can provide insertion support if you're determined to investigate. Rakshata's expression hardened. You understand what you're proposing. This isn't extracting civilians from military cordons. This is infiltrating a research facility that may contain weapons you don't understand, subjects who may be victims or threats or both. and intelligence that could reshape the entire conflict. Which is why investigation is necessary, or it's why you should leave it to people trained for intelligence operations rather than armed intervention. Rakshata turned back to the fabrication systems. But I suspect you've already made the decision. You just needed someone to confirm the target was viable. She was correct. Setsuna had determined infiltration was necessary the moment he understood Geass was developed rather than spontaneous. Waiting for perfect intelligence meant accepting the weapon's continued deployment. Acting on fragmentary data created risks, but eliminated the source faster. When can the Gundam achieve minimal operational status? Minimal now. You have 19% synchronization. That's sufficient for mobility and basic combat. Full restoration requires the integration, which requires 4 days. Rakshata pulled up a tactical overlay. If you're planning infiltration before then, you'll be operating without your primary advantage. One machine barely superior to elite nightmares against an unknown defensive force. Infiltration doesn't require superior firepower. It requires precision and timing. And if you're discovered, then I fight my way out at 19% and hope it's sufficient. Rakshata made a sound that might have been laughter or disgust. You're either supremely confident or you've internalized a death wish. Possibly both. She closed the fabrication displays. I'll contact Zero. Coordinate intelligence support. If you're determined to investigate before proper capability is restored, at least do it with adequate reconnaissance. Setsuna accessed the Mount Fuji facility data and began tactical planning. Underground complex, multiple levels, limited entry points, internal security unknown, civilian presence uncertain. The operation would require stealth approach, minimal engagement, information gathering prioritized over combat effectiveness. And if he discovered active harm being conducted against civilians or subjects, he would intervene, regardless of combat disadvantage. Standard protocol. The same calculations he'd been making for 3 weeks, except now the target wasn't conventional military forces. It was the infrastructure that created weapons targeting human consciousness. Cutting that infrastructure would accomplish more than 100 civilian extractions, would prevent future massacres, would eliminate a weapon that conventional intervention couldn't counter. The mathematics justified the risk. Setsuna spent the next 12 hours planning. Infiltration routes, extraction corridors, contingency protocols for various discovery scenarios. The operation crystallized into executable format. Zero's intelligence network updated the facility data with real-time security patterns. Guard rotations, supply deliveries, personnel movements. The support was professional and comprehensive. Rakshata provided equipment. Stealth coding compounds for the Gundam, sensor jamming devices, emergency beacon technology in case extraction became impossible. By the second day, preparation was complete. Setsuna approached the Gundam and began activation sequences. The machine responded sluggishly. 19% synchronization meant delayed response times and reduced output. But it was sufficient for mobility and basic operations. He maneuvered out of the facility and began transit toward Mount Fuji. The approach took 6 hours at reduced speed. Setsuna positioned the Gundam 5 kilometers from the facility entrance and proceeded on foot. The stealth coding would mask the machine's signature. Recovery would require returning to this position. The facility entrance was disguised as a geological survey station. Minimal visible security. The real defenses would be underground. Setsuna accessed the security patterns Zero had provided. Guard change occurred every 6 hours. Supply delivery window opened twice weekly. Personnel transfers happened monthly. He had 18 hours before the next supply delivery. Enough time to infiltrate, gather intelligence, and extract. The entrance security was sophisticated but predictable. Electronic locks, biometric scanners, motion sensors, standard high-security installation protocols. Setsuna bypassed the systems using a combination of celestial being infiltration training and equipment Rakshata had provided. Portable signal spoofer. Biometric data intercepted from a former Kyoto House contractor who'd worked facility maintenance before the project went fully black. The intelligence wasn't current, but architectural fundamentals rarely changed. The locks opened. The sensors registered authorized entry. The biometric scanners accepted spoofed credentials. He descended into the facility. The architecture was clinical. White walls, fluorescent lighting, air circulation systems maintaining precise environmental conditions. This wasn't military infrastructure. It was research installation. Setsuna moved through corridors following the facility layout Zero's network had partially reconstructed. Security cameras covered major intersections. He avoided their scanning patterns through timing and route selection. 3 levels down, the architecture changed. The clinical white gave way to reinforced containment. Heavy doors with electronic locks and manual overrides. Observation windows with impact-resistant glass. Symbols etched into door frames. Geometric patterns that resembled no writing system Setsuna recognized. Code R, designation markers on access panels. This was the research section. The air felt different here. Sound dampened. Movement seemed to take slightly more effort, as if the atmosphere itself had been altered to suppress human instinct. Setsuna approached the first observation window and looked inside. The room contained a young woman, restrained, monitoring equipment attached to her body. A researcher taking notes while she stared at nothing with an expression of absolute emptiness. Digital displays beside the observation window showed data Setsuna didn't fully understand. Subject compatibility, 14%. Trigger condition, line of sight. Command limitation, single use. Neural feedback, critical. The configuration suggested experimentation. The restraints suggested unwilling participation. The clinical documentation of trigger conditions suggested they'd industrialize something that should never exist. Setsuna moved to the next window. A man. Similar setup. Similar emptiness. Different monitoring parameters. Third window. A child. No older than 12. Restrained. Monitored. Empty. The pattern repeated across 8 observation rooms. 8 subjects. All restrained. All monitored, all exhibiting the same vacant expression that suggested their consciousness had been damaged or removed. This was the source, where Geass was developed, where human beings were used as experimental material to refine weapons that corrupted minds. Setsuna's tactical assessment shifted. This was no longer reconnaissance. This was active harm requiring immediate intervention. He began accessing the cell locks. Electronic systems, sophisticated but standard. The doors opened one by one. The subjects didn't move, didn't respond. Whatever had been done to them had damaged their ability to process freedom as an option. Setsuna entered the first cell and began removing restraints. The woman's eyes tracked movement, but showed no recognition, no fear, no hope. Just observation, without comprehension. He moved through all 8 cells. Freed all 8 subjects. They sat or stood where they'd been restrained, waiting for instructions that had always come from others. You're free. The exit is that direction. Setsuna pointed. Move, now. 2 subjects began walking. The others remained stationary. This was inadequate. They couldn't self-extract. Whatever Geass experimentation had done to them had removed autonomous decision-making capability. Setsuna triggered his emergency beacon. Transmitted facility coordinates and situation summary to Zero's network. Requested immediate extraction support for 8 civilians in medical crisis. The response came within seconds. Support inbound. Estimated arrival 30 minutes. Hold position. 30 minutes. The supply delivery wasn't scheduled for 16 more hours. But his infiltration had likely triggered silent alarms. Security response would be faster than scheduled events. More critically, the cell monitoring system showed new alerts. Containment breach protocol initiated. Subject termination sequence standby. They were preparing to eliminate the test subjects rather than risk extraction. Setsuna moved the subjects toward a central location, positioned them in a defensible space. Then he accessed the facility's research database while keeping one eye on the termination countdown. 12 minutes until automated termination. The files were extensive. Decades of experimentation. He couldn't extract everything. Setsuna pulled executive summaries, deployment ledgers, facility network maps, and subject outcome statistics. The critical intelligence that would map the broader infrastructure. Success rates below 15%. Mortality rates above 40%. Side effects including permanent cognitive damage, psychological breakdown, and catastrophic neural failure. And beneath the experimental data deployment records, Geass users granted to Britannian royalty, powers tailored to specific tactical requirements, a weapon distributed through the Empire's highest levels. Download complete 43% of total archive. Enough to understand the network, not enough to expose every detail. Cutting this facility would accomplish nothing if the broader network remained functional, but it would save 8 people and provide intelligence that could enable cutting the network's route. Adequate justification for the operation. Alarms activated. Security protocols engaged. The facility lockdown sequence began. Setsuna positioned himself between the subjects and the corridor. Emergency beacon still active. 28 minutes until extraction support arrived. Automated defenses deployed first. Ceiling-mounted turrets dropped from concealed panels. Motion tracking systems. Setsuna used a flash charge from his infiltration kit and destroyed their targeting sensors with thrown debris, while the subjects remained in the blind spot he'd positioned them in. Ventilation systems reversed. Gas began flooding the corridor. Setsuna recognized the composition from the hiss and chemical smell. Sedative agent. Not lethal, but incapacitating. He triggered the emergency air seal on the research room and held position inside. The subjects would be protected. He would have limited oxygen. Acceptable trade. Security forces arrived 6 minutes later through sealed access corridors the gas couldn't reach. Not nightmare frames. This was underground facility. They deployed on foot. 12 personnel. Military-grade equipment. Trained movement patterns. Setsuna had the infiltration kit. Stun baton, flash charges, smoke grenades, and training that Privaskodelik Podgotovku. He used the corridor geometry and the facility's own lockdown against them. Triggered compartment seals that divided their formation. Cut lighting in strategic sections. The engagement became a series of isolated encounters rather than 12-on-1. He disabled rather than killed. Broken limbs, damaged joints, stunned nervous systems, injuries that would require medical attention but wouldn't prove fatal. 12 personnel neutralized in 90 seconds of fragmented combat. Additional forces would be mobilizing. Heavier equipment, modified tactics. But the extraction support would arrive first. 22 minutes remaining. The facility's environmental controls shifted again. Temperature dropping. They were trying to force him into withdrawal through hypothermia. Setsuna adjusted position to keep the subjects warm and waited. The second wave came 15 minutes later. 8 additional personnel. Better equipped. More cautious. They'd reviewed footage of the first engagement and adjusted accordingly. This fight took longer. 3 minutes. Setsuna sustained minor injuries. Bruised ribs. Cut above left eye. Nothing that compromised combat effectiveness. 8 more personnel neutralized. 7 minutes remaining. The facility intercom activated. A voice Setsuna didn't recognize. Unknown operative. You've damaged valuable research and freed experimental subjects. Surrender and you'll be processed as a prisoner of war. Resist and you'll be terminated. Setsuna didn't respond. Very well. Heavy response authorized. The third wave would be lethal force. Setsuna positioned the subjects in the most defensible corner and prepared for sustained engagement. The extraction support arrived 4 minutes early. Black Knight's operatives descended through an emergency access shaft. 12 fighters. Professional insertion. They moved to secure the subjects, while Setsuna maintained corridor defense. Subject secured. Extraction in progress. Setsuna withdrew toward the insertion point. Behind him, Britannian forces were repositioning for a final push. Ahead, Black Knight's operatives were moving 8 damaged people toward freedom. The mathematics worked. Everyone extracted. Mission success. He reached the surface 12 minutes later. The Gundam was where he'd left it, undiscovered. The stealth coating Rakshata had provided, combined with Mount Fuji's natural electromagnetic interference from volcanic activity, created enough sensor noise that standard detection systems struggled to differentiate the machine from geological anomalies. Functional enough, Black Knight's transport vehicles were already moving the freed subjects toward medical facilities. Setsuna transmitted the downloaded research data to Zero's network and began return transit to Rakshata's facility. The operation had accomplished objectives. 8 victims freed from experimentation. Intelligence gathered on Geass infrastructure. No fatalities on any side. But the data revealed the scope of the problem. This facility was one node in a network spanning the Empire. Cutting one node wouldn't stop the weapon's deployment, wouldn't prevent future euphemias from being corrupted into monsters. Setsuna needed to find the network's center, the source from which all Geass capability originated. And then he needed to eliminate it with the same precision he'd applied to conventional military operations. He reached Rakshata's facility as the sun set. The scientist was waiting in the hangar. Zero briefed me. You infiltrated a Geass research site, freed 8 subjects, and extracted with complete intelligence package. Either you're extremely skilled or extremely lucky. Probably both. She gestured toward the Gundam. Park it. The integration hardware is ready. We begin synchronization restoration tomorrow morning. Setsuna maneuvered the damaged machine into position and powered down. Tomorrow restoration would begin. 4 days to full capability, maybe 5. And then he would use that capability to cut the Geass network at its root. The war had depth beyond conventional operations. Weapons beyond bullets and beams. Infrastructure beyond military installations. But infrastructure could be mapped. Weapons could be countered. And routes once identified could be severed. Setsuna had ended wars before by cutting what made them possible. This war would be no different, just deeper. In a secure location far from Mount Fuji, a figure reviewed access logs and security footage with growing concern. The breach had been surgical, professional. The operative had known exactly where to go, what to extract, how to neutralize resistance without leaving bodies that would generate uncomfortable questions. Someone with training that exceeded standard military protocols. The same profile as the white machine that had been disrupting operations across Area 11. The figure made 3 calls. Data migration protocols activated across the Geass research network. Witnesses were relocated. Security procedures updated. The breach was classified Omega level. Total information suppression authorized. If the operative thought one facility's intelligence would expose the network, they were mistaken. The network had survived for decades by assuming compromise and building redundancy. One breach was an inconvenience, but it also provided data, the operative's methods, capabilities, psychological profile, information that would prove useful when the counter-operation launched. The figure closed the security review and opened a new file. Target designation White Guardian. Status priority Omega elimination authorized. All assets committed. The integration took 6 days instead of 4. Rakshata had underestimated the complexity of forcing quantum systems to accept classical physics harmonics as stabilization framework. The first 3 attempts resulted in catastrophic resonance failures that nearly shattered the twin drive coherence completely. The 4th attempt achieved partial synchronization. 38%. Progress, but insufficient. The fifth attempt incorporated adaptive feedback loops that compensated for quantum fluctuation in real time. 51% functional, approaching viable. The sixth attempt succeeded. 73% synchronization, not optimal. Not the 90+% the system achieved with proper GN drive calibration, but vastly superior to the 19% catastrophic damage state. Setsuna sat in the cockpit and felt the difference immediately. Response time improved, output capacity expanded. The Gundam moved like a machine again, instead of a damaged wreck held together by determination and mathematics. Rakshata's voice came through on the facility intercom. 73% is the ceiling for Securidite integration. The harmonic bridge can't force quantum systems any closer to optimal without introducing destructive interference. You'll have to accept operational capability at 3/4 strength. Acknowledged, it's sufficient. For what conventional operations or attacking the Geass network infrastructure you've been researching obsessively for the past 6 days. Setsuna didn't respond. The answer was obvious. Right. Well, Zero wants to speak with you before you go hunting Britannian research facilities. He's concerned you'll start a war the Black Knights can't finish, which is probably accurate. Rakshata closed the channel. Setsuna powered down the Gundam and descended to the communication suite. Zero's channel was already active. Waiting. The masked figure appeared on screen. Theatrical, as always. But the body language carried tension that suggested the conversation would be difficult. Congratulations on the successful integration. Rakshata says the twin drive is operating at acceptable parameters, which means you'll return to field operations immediately. Zero's hands clasped behind his back. I need you to delay that return by 48 hours. Explain. Britannia is deploying new assets in response to your operations. Advanced nightmare frames with capabilities that approach your machine's performance envelope. Pilots selected for skill rather than political loyalty. They're hunting you specifically. Zero pulled up tactical data. The most dangerous is Suzaku Kururugi, Knight of 7, piloting the Lancelot Albion. Priority Omega rewrote the procurement calendar. What should have been years of testing was compressed into weeks. Energy wing system that provides aerial mobility superior to anything currently deployed. Weapons package that can actually threaten your defensive fields. Setsuna reviewed the data. The Lancelot Albion was sophisticated, fast, well-armed, piloted by someone Britannia trusted with eliminating priority threats. You want me to avoid engagement. I want you to understand what engagement means. Suzaku isn't like the pilots you fought before. He's not a soldier following orders. He's an idealist trying to reform Britannia from within. He believes the Empire can be changed into something better. That working within the system is the only path to lasting peace. Zero's tone carried something complex. He's wrong, but he believes it absolutely, and that makes him dangerous in ways conventional military force isn't. Why does his ideology matter to tactical engagement? Because killing him accomplishes nothing and creates a martyr Britannia will use to justify escalation. And you won't kill him anyway. You never do. Which means the engagement will end with him alive, more determined, and better informed about your capabilities. Zero leaned forward. Unless you can convince him that working within Britannia's system is impossible. That reform can't fix what's fundamentally broken. Setsuna understood. Zero wanted him to convert an enemy rather than defeat one. To use ideological confrontation as weapon instead of particle beams. That's not my role. It is now. Because the conflict is evolving beyond military operations. Euphemia's massacre proved that good intentions within a corrupt system produce atrocities. Suzaku needs to understand that. And you're uniquely positioned to demonstrate it. Zero's mask caught the light. He fights to protect people by serving the Empire. You fight to protect people by cutting war at its root. The confrontation writes itself. I'm not a philosopher. No. You're something more persuasive. You're proof that alternatives exist. That operating outside corrupt systems is possible. That serving Empire isn't the only path to protecting civilians. Zero paused. Meet him. Fight him. Show him what undivided purpose accomplishes compared to compromise within rotten structures. The rest will follow naturally. The channel closed before Setsuna could object. 48 hours passed in enforced standby. Setsuna used the time reviewing Geass infrastructure data and developing tactical approaches for deeper facility penetration. The research didn't reduce his operational readiness. If anything, understanding the target sharpened focus. He returned to the hangar and began final preparation. 73% synchronization, sufficient for most operations. The question was whether it was sufficient to engage an elite pilot in an advanced machine, while simultaneously conducting ideological warfare. The answer would reveal itself in combat. Setsuna departed the facility at dawn and began transit toward Tokyo settlement. The coordinate from Zero indicated high probability of Lancelot Albion deployment in the northern industrial sectors. Britannian command was establishing patrol patterns designed to intercept him during civilian extraction operations. They were learning, adapting, using his predictability against him. Standard tactical evolution. Setsuna moved through the industrial sectors at reduced emissions. The Gundam stealth coding made detection difficult, but not impossible. If Suzaku was hunting specifically for him, proximity sensors would eventually achieve contact. 3 hours into the patrol pattern, contact was achieved. The Lancelot Albion appeared from behind a warehouse complex at combat speed. White and gold armor. Energy wings fully deployed. Moving with precision that suggested an exceptional pilot. The communication channel opened immediately. A young man's voice, serious, controlled. Unknown nightmare. You've been classified as priority Omega threat to Imperial security. Power down and surrender for processing. This is your only warning. Setsuna studied the Lancelot's configuration. The energy wings provided three-dimensional mobility that standard nightmare frames couldn't match. The weapons package included Varus rifles/Harkins and what appeared to be an experimental hadron-based system. Sophisticated, dangerous, but still conventional force. I'm not your enemy. You've destroyed Imperial property, interfered with military operations, extracted persons of interest from lawful custody. Suzaku's tone carried absolute certainty. That makes you an enemy of order and peace. I've saved civilians from being used as weapons. There's a difference. You've enabled terrorists to continue operations by removing the consequences of their actions. You've prolonged the conflict by preventing resolution through proper channels. The Lancelot raised its Varus rifle. I'm giving you one more chance. Surrender and face legal process, or I'll engage with lethal force. Setsuna calculated engagement parameters. The Lancelot's energy wings made it faster than anything he'd fought before. The Hadron weapons could potentially stress the GN field in ways conventional armaments couldn't. And the pilot believed absolutely in what he was doing. This wouldn't be a simple disabling action. I don't surrender to systems that create the problems I'm solving. Suzaku fired. The Varus round crossed the distance at hypersonic velocity. Setsuna displaced laterally. The shot missed by meters. Return fire would escalate immediately to lethal engagement. He chose a different approach. The Gundam moved forward at maximum speed, closed the distance instead of maintaining range. Suzaku's energy wings flared and he ascended vertically. Aerial advantage, exactly as training would dictate. Setsuna followed through short-burst GN particle thrust. Not true sustained flight like the Lancelot's wings. Sequential jumps, controlled ascents using particle output to overcome gravity in intervals. 73% synchronization allowed enough output for vertical pursuit, but not indefinite aerial combat. Suzaku fired 3 more times during the ascent. Each shot precisely placed. Each shot anticipated and evaded. The pilot was adapting to Setsuna's movement patterns in real time. Professional. Dangerous. Exactly as Zero had warned. They reached 500 meters altitude. The industrial sector spread below them. Civilians watching. Britannian forces repositioning. This fight was becoming spectacle. Setsuna stopped ascending and held position. Made himself a static target. Suzaku hesitated. The tactical advantage was obvious. Why would an opponent sacrifice mobility? You're testing something, Suzaku said. Trying to confirm my weapon's capability or measure my restraint? Neither. I'm offering you a choice. I've already given you choices. You refused all of them. Different choice. Continue fighting and we both waste time accomplishing nothing. Or answer one question honestly, and we end this without casualties. Suzaku's Lancelot circled. Weapons ready but not firing. What question? Euphemia Lee Britannia. At the SIZ. Did she intend to massacre Japanese civilians? The Lancelot's movement pattern stuttered. Brief. Barely noticeable. But present. The official report. I'm not asking about reports. I'm asking what you believe. You knew her. Served with her. The woman who created the SAS and promised freedom. Did she intend genocide? Silence held for 5 seconds. No. Suzaku's voice carried weight that suggested the admission cost something. She didn't. Something happened. Something that turned her order into a command she never intended. But the result is the same. Thousands died. Intent is irrelevant next to outcome. Intent shows the system's direction. Outcome shows its reality. Setsuna descended 20 meters, made himself an easier target. Euphemia tried to create change within Britannia's structure, used her authority to establish freedom within imperial framework. And the system corrupted her good intentions into justification for atrocity. That's not failure of individual will. That's proof the system itself is diseased. You don't understand. The empire isn't monolithic. There are good people working within it, trying to make it better. Abandoning the system means abandoning those people and the progress they've achieved. What progress? Britannia conquered Japan 7 years ago, renamed it Area 11, stripped its people of identity and dignity. 7 years of good people working within the system, and the result is a massacre at the first genuine attempt at reform. Setsuna's hands remained steady on the controls. That's not progress. That's proof that working within corrupt structures makes you complicit in their crimes. One tragedy doesn't invalidate reform. Change is non-linear. It requires time, institutions, legal frameworks. You can't measure 7 years of incremental progress against one catastrophic failure and claim the entire approach is worthless. Suzaku's voice carried conviction. Euphemia's death proves we need more reform, not less. More people willing to serve despite the cost. Suzaku fired. The Varus round struck the Gundam's chest armor. The GN field absorbed the impact, but feedback rippled through the system. Warning indicators flashed. The shot had been placed perfectly to test defensive capability without causing catastrophic damage. You think you're better because you operate outside the system, because you don't compromise. But all you do is treat symptoms, save civilians from immediate danger, and call it victory. You're not changing anything fundamental. You're just making yourself feel righteous while the underlying problems continue. Suzaku's Lancelot accelerated. Energy wings flared. He closed distance and engaged in close combat. Harkins deployed. Setsuna cut them mid-flight. Suzaku used the distraction to position for a kick. The Lancelot's leg struck the Gundam's side. Physical impact. No energy field could fully negate momentum transfer. The Gundam absorbed the blow and countered with a strike aimed at the Lancelot's wing mechanism. Suzaku rotated and evaded. Both machines separated and reassessed. "You're skilled," Suzaku said. "Better than anyone I've fought. But skill without purpose is just violence. What are you actually trying to accomplish? Save every civilian in Area 11 one operation at a time? That's impossible. Unsustainable. Eventually you'll fail or leave, and everything reverts to how it was. Then I'll eliminate what makes it revert. Cut the machinery that perpetuates conflict. Remove the weapons that corrupt good intentions into atrocities. You can't eliminate war by fighting. You can't create peace through violence. All you can do is replace one form of conflict with another." Suzaku's voice carried conviction that bordered on desperation. Change has to come from within the system. Through law. Through reform. Through people willing to serve even when service is difficult. Euphemia served. She reformed. She created law that promised freedom. And the system turned her into a mass murderer. Setsuna fired 3 precision shots. Each targeted a different section of the Lancelot's energy wing mechanism. Each shot was evaded. How many more Euphemias before you understand? How many good people have to be corrupted before you accept that the system is the problem? Suzaku triggered the Hadron Cannon. Experimental weapon. Massive energy discharge. The beam struck the Gundam's GN field at maximum output. Feedback cascaded through the defensive systems. Synchronization dropped to 68%. The Sakura-Dite integration struggled to compensate for the sustained energy assault, but it held. Setsuna returned fire while the field stabilized. Particle beam targeted the Hadron Cannon's emitter array. The shot struck cleanly. The weapon deformed and separated from the Lancelot's arm mount. "You just destroyed Imperial property worth more than most civilians earn in a lifetime," Suzaku said. "It was being used to kill me. That makes it a threat requiring neutralization. And when Britannia builds 10 more to 20 when they deploy weapons you can't counter and forces you can't defeat, what happens to your impossible mission then? I adapt, upgrade, find the source of those weapons, and eliminate it before deployment." Setsuna's tactical display showed Britannian reinforcements approaching. This engagement was becoming too visible, too extended. The same way I'm finding the source of Geass and eliminating the infrastructure that creates weapons targeting human consciousness. The Lancelot stopped moving. "You know about Geass? I've seen its effects. I've infiltrated research facilities. I've freed subjects damaged by experimentation. I know it's real. I know it's deployed through Britannian command structures. And I know it corrupted Euphemia into ordering genocide she never intended." Setsuna descended another 20 meters. "You served with her, protected her, and the system you're defending used a weapon you didn't know existed to turn her into a monster. How is that not proof that reform from within is impossible?" Suzaku's Lancelot remained stationary. The pilot was processing, calculating, confronting information that contradicted his foundational beliefs. If Geass is real, if it was used on Euphemia, then someone within Britannia's command structure deliberately weaponized her. Suzaku's voice had lost its certainty, which means there are elements within the Empire that can't be reformed, that actively resist change, not elements, the Empire itself. Geass isn't deployed by rogue actors, it's distributed through the highest levels, integrated into strategic command, built into the system you're trying to reform from within. Setsuna checked the approach vectors of the reinforcements. 30 seconds until engagement range. You can't fix what's designed to be broken, and you can't eliminate a global empire by cutting individual pieces, Even if you destroy every Geass research facility, Britannia will develop new weapons, new methods of control. The pattern continues unless the fundamental structure changes. Then we agree. The structure must change. The difference is, I'm willing to cut it down while you're still trying to renovate from inside. Suzaku's Lancelot raised its remaining weapons. I can't let you operate freely. Even if you're right about Geass. Even if Euphemia was controlled. The chaos you create makes peaceful resolution impossible. Peaceful resolution was impossible the moment Britannia decided conquest was civilization. I'm just removing the illusion that made people accept it. The Britannian reinforcements arrived. 6 Gloucesters. Elite configuration. They established formation around Suzaku's position. Stand down, Suzaku transmitted to them. I'll handle this engagement. Negative Knight of 7. Priority Omega targets require overwhelming force. We're authorized for lethal engagement. Suzaku looked at the Gundam. At the disabled Hadron cannon. At the proof that even experimental weapons couldn't guarantee victory against an operator who'd ended wars before. Final offer, Suzaku said. Withdraw. Stop interfering with Imperial operations. I'll report that you evaded engagement and recommend resources be allocated to non-military solutions for civilian displacement. Counteroffer. Stop serving an empire that uses its own royalty as weapons. Join efforts to actually eliminate the systems creating the problems you're trying to solve. I can't abandon my duty. Your duty is to protect people, not empires. There's a difference. The 6 Gloucesters opened fire. Coordinated volley. Suzaku's Lancelot hesitated for 1 second, then joined the engagement. Setsuna targeted the Gloucesters first. Standard formation. Predictable attack vectors. He used their coordination against them. Fired through gaps that forced them to displace into each other's firing lines. Created crossfire situations where their own doctrine demanded evasive maneuvers that exposed mobility systems. 38 seconds. 6 Gloucesters combat ineffective. Weapons destroyed. Leg actuators compromised. Pilots alive but unable to continue engagement. The Lancelot remained. Alone. Energy wings at full deployment. Suzaku made his choice and attacked. The engagement lasted 2 minutes. Lancelot's aerial superiority against Gundam's firepower advantage. Energy wings provided mobility the Gundam couldn't match in sustained aerial combat. But 73% synchronization provided output the Lancelot couldn't overcome. Suzaku deployed every tactic. Slash Harkins from multiple vectors. Varus shots timed to exploit displacement windows. Hadron cannon used to force defensive positioning. Professional execution, elite capability. Setsuna countered each approach. Cut the Harkins mid-flight. Evaded the Varus rounds through prediction rather than reaction. Absorbed the Hadron discharge on GN field and returned fire through the energy wash. The Varus rifle took a particle beam through its barrel assembly. Melted into uselessness. The Hadron cannon's emitter array shattered under precision strike. The energy wing mechanisms locked when Setsuna put particle beams through their articulation points. Not severed, not destroyed, jammed. Repairable but currently non-functional. The Lancelot dropped and caught itself on emergency thrusters. Grounded, disarmed, defeated, but intact. Total engagement time from first Gloucester shot to Lancelot. Neutralization 2 minutes 43 seconds. Setsuna positioned the Gundam directly in front of Suzaku's cockpit. Visual range. The GN sword in rifle configuration pointed at the disabled machine. I'm not your enemy. Britannia is. The system that corrupted Euphemia. That deploys Geass against its own people. That treats civilians as resources to be managed and discarded. Setsuna's voice carried no triumph, no satisfaction. Just fact. You want to protect people. So do I. The difference is, I'm willing to cut what threatens them, instead of serving it. He lowered the weapon and withdrew north. Behind him, Suzaku sat in the damaged Lancelot and stared at nothing. The Britannian reinforcements were already calling for extraction. Medical teams, repair crews, damage assessment specialists. The machinery of Imperial response ground into motion. But something had changed. Suzaku had fought to defend the Empire, had engaged with absolute certainty that reform from within was possible, had believed that service and sacrifice would eventually create the change Euphemia had tried to establish. And he'd lost in 43 seconds to someone who rejected everything Suzaku believed. The tactical defeat was irrelevant. Machines could be repaired, weapons replaced, tactics adjusted. But the ideological defeat sat like a stone. If Geass was real, if Euphemia had been controlled, if the Empire deployed weapons that corrupted its own people into monsters, then what was he actually serving? Suzaku activated his communication system. Command would want a full report. Tactical assessment, damage evaluation, recommendations for future engagements. He began compiling the data, then stopped. The Geass information. The claim that Euphemia had been controlled. That detail would change everything. Redirect investigations. Force questions about weapons deployment at the highest levels. It would also make him look like he'd been manipulated by the enemy. Fed convenient excuses for Imperial crimes. Unable to accept that Euphemia might have simply broken under pressure, Suzaku stared at the incomplete report and made a choice he would question for weeks. He filed tactical data on the Gundam's capabilities, weapon systems, mobility patterns, defensive parameters. He omitted everything about Geass. The decision felt like betrayal and self-preservation simultaneously. Suzaku closed his eyes and tried to find the certainty that had carried him through years of fighting. The belief that change from within was possible. That sacrifice within the system would eventually produce the peace Euphemia had wanted. The certainty didn't return. All he found was the memory of a white machine disappearing into the distance. And the question it had left behind. How many more Euphemias before you understand? In Britannian command centers, analysts reviewed the engagement data. 7 elite machines neutralized. 0 fatalities. Priority Omega threat remained active and had demonstrated improved capability. Cornelia Britannia read the reports and made immediate decisions. Conventional forces were insufficient. Elite pilots couldn't guarantee victory. The white machine operated beyond normal tactical parameters. New countermeasures were required. Strategies that didn't rely on superior firepower or pilot skill. She opened a secure channel to Research Division Command. The message was brief. Deploy Geass assets for priority Omega elimination. Authorization code Empress. No restrictions. Somewhere in the Imperial hierarchy, orders were received. Assets were mobilized, and weapons that corrupted minds, prepared for deployment against a target that had just demonstrated conventional force, was inadequate. The escalation continued, exactly as the conflict's deeper architecture demanded. Setsuna returned to Rakshata's facility as the sun set. The engagement had been successful by tactical metrics. 7 elite machines disabled. No fatalities. Mission accomplished. But Zero's actual objective had been ideological conversion. Convincing Suzaku that reform from within was impossible. That serving Britannia was complicity in its crimes. The data was insufficient to determine success on that front. Rakshata was waiting in the hangar. Synchronization held at 68% through sustained combat. The integration is stable. You can operate at approximately 3/4 capability indefinitely. Acknowledged. Zero wants a debrief on the Suzaku engagement. He's particularly interested in whether you actually convinced an Imperial Knight to question his loyalty. Rakshata pulled up diagnostic displays. Did you? Setsuna considered the question. Suzaku had hesitated before joining the final engagement. Had offered withdrawal as an option. Had processed information about Geass without immediate rejection. Small indicators, insufficient for certainty, but present. Unknown. The data is ambiguous. That's more than Zero expected. He thought you'd just fight and disengage. Actually planting doubt in an idealist's mind is significant progress. Rakshata closed the displays. Next operation, Geass infrastructure elimination. The Mount Fuji facility provided intelligence on the network structure. There's a central node, the source from which all Geass capability originates. Eliminating that node collapses the entire weapons system. And where is this mythical central node? Unknown. The intelligence is fragmented. But patterns exist. References to a primary asset. Code designation, CC origin point for Geass distribution. Location classified above the facility data extracted. Setsuna pulled up the analysis he'd been developing. Zero's network is running correlation algorithms. When the location is identified, I'll dismantle the facility and remove the operational capability, enabling consciousness weaponization. Rakshata studied him for a long moment. You're talking about attacking what's likely the most heavily defended research installation in the Britannian Empire, with a machine operating at 3/4 capability, against forces that now know your tactics and limitations. Yes, that's either supreme confidence or a death wish. It's necessity. Geass creates weapons that conventional force can't counter, that corrupt good intentions into atrocities, that make reform impossible. Dismantling the infrastructure is the only path to ending this conflict. And if dismantling Geass infrastructure doesn't end the conflict, if Britannia just develops new weapons, new methods of control, then I dismantle those too. One weapon system at a time, one facility at a time, until the machinery enabling conflict breaks down completely. Setsuna turned toward the Gundam. That's what armed intervention means. Removing what makes conflict possible until continuation becomes impossible. Rakshata made a sound that might have been respect or resignation. You're going to get yourself killed. But you'll probably take significant chunks of Britannia's war machine with you, which I suppose is acceptable consolation. Setsuna didn't respond. The assessment was accurate and therefore required no comment. He returned to the communication suite and accessed Zero's intelligence network. The search algorithms were still running, cross-referencing facility locations, personnel transfers, resource allocations, research director movements. The pattern would eventually reveal the source, the central node, the place where Geass originated. And when it did, Setsuna would go there with 73% synchronization and the absolute certainty that eliminating that facility would accomplish more than 100 civilian extractions. The war had depth beyond conventional operations, weapons beyond conventional physics, infrastructure beyond military installations. But infrastructure could be mapped, weapons could be countered, and depth properly understood just meant knowing where to cut to cause systemic collapse. Setsuna had ended wars before. This one was just deeper, and deeper wars required deeper cuts. The location came through Zero's network 9 days after the Suzaku engagement. Setsuna reviewed the intelligence in Rakshata's facility. The data was comprehensive: satellite imagery, personnel tracking, supply chain analysis, power consumption patterns. Everything pointed to a single conclusion. The Geass Order's primary facility was located beneath Kamine Island. Offshore installation, heavy security, multiple redundant defensive systems, and at its center, the source of consciousness weaponization that had corrupted Euphemia and enabled an empire to deploy mind control as standard operational doctrine. Rakshata studied the same data with professional skepticism. This is either accurate intelligence or the most sophisticated trap Britannia has ever constructed. She pulled up defensive configuration estimates. Assuming it's real, you're looking at layered security that makes the Mount Fuji facility look like a supply depot. Automated defense systems, elite personnel, and almost certainly Geass users deployed as final protection. Can the integration handle sustained combat at that intensity? The securidite harmonics are stable at 73% synchronization. But stable and optimal aren't the same thing. Push too hard and the quantum coherence could collapse. You'd be left with a very expensive paperweight. Rakshata magnified the power flow diagrams. That said, I've been working on something. An enhancement to the integration architecture. She pulled up new schematics. Modified field generators, advanced harmonic compensation algorithms, adaptive resonance tuning. If we implement this upgrade, I estimate we can push synchronization to 87%, maybe 90% if the quantum fluctuations cooperate. But it requires complete system shutdown for 36 hours while the new hardware integrates. And there's a non-trivial chance the modification destabilizes everything. Setsuna calculated the variables. Higher synchronization meant better capability. Better capability meant higher probability of mission success. The risk was acceptable given the target's strategic importance. Implement the upgrade. You're not even going to ask about the failure probability. Will asking change your assessment? No, but most people want to know the odds before they commit to potentially irreversible modifications. Rakshata began initializing the fabrication systems. You're either supremely confident in my work, or you've accepted that risk is irrelevant next to necessity. Both. Rakshata smiled. The expression carried approval. I'll begin the upgrade tonight. If everything works, you'll have near-optimal capability in 36 hours. If it doesn't work, we'll all find out what catastrophic quantum desynchronization looks like from uncomfortably close range. Setsuna spent the shutdown period reviewing tactical approaches. The Kamine Island facility was offshore. Underwater approach was possible, but limited exit routes. Aerial insertion was faster, but sacrificed stealth. Direct assault was straightforward, but guaranteed maximum resistance. He settled on a hybrid approach. Underwater insertion to bypass perimeter defenses. Surface breach at minimal security point. Rapid penetration to central facility. Extract or destroy the Geass source. Withdraw before Britannian response forces could establish containment. The plan required speed and precision. Both would be available if the upgrade succeeded. 36 hours passed. Rakshata ran the first diagnostic sequence. The twin drive responded smoothly. Synchronization stabilized at 89%. The quantum coherence held under stress testing. Field harmonics adapted to power fluctuations without desynchronization. The upgrade had succeeded. Setsuna activated the Gundam's full sensor suite and felt the difference immediately. Response time approaching optimal. Output capacity substantially improved. The machine moved like it had during initial arrival. Before the damage, before the restrictions, 89% synchronization and holding stable. Rakshata's voice carried satisfaction. That's as close to optimal as we're getting with securidite integration. You now have a machine that can challenge anything Britannia deploys. Use it wisely. Setsuna ran final systems checks. GN drive output near maximum sustainable levels. Particle generation stable across all operational modes. Defensive fields full strength. Weapon systems optimal parameters. This was the capability he'd arrived with. Restored through improvised solutions and adapted technology. Sufficient to accomplish what conventional force couldn't. He opened communication to Zero's network. Ready for Kamine Island operation, requesting final intelligence update and extraction coordination. Zero's response came within minutes. Audio only. The mask was absent from the transmission, but the voice remained modulated. Final update is concerning. Britannia detected our intelligence gathering. They know we've identified Kamine Island. Cornelia has repositioned forces to defend the facility. You'll be walking into prepared defenses. Zero paused. She's also authorized Geass asset deployment. Expect weapons that target consciousness directly. Your helmet should provide some protection, but don't assume immunity. Noted. Extraction coordination. Black Knights will stage a diversionary operation in Tokyo settlement. Draw off mobile forces. You'll have approximately 4 hours before Britannia realizes the diversion and redirects assets to Kamine Island. Make them count. Zero's tone shifted. This operation exceeds everything we've attempted. If you succeed, you cripple Britannia's ability to deploy consciousness weapons. If you fail, you gift them the most advanced mobile suit on the planet. The risk-reward calculation is extreme. Acceptable. I thought you'd say that. Zero's channel began to close. One more thing. The Geass Order isn't just a research facility. It's where damaged minds get sent for experimentation. People like the subjects you freed from Mount Fuji. If you find more, extract them if possible. But mission priority is destroying the Geass source. Don't sacrifice the objective for rescue operations. The transmission ended. Setsuna departed Rakshata's facility at midnight. The Gundam moved through darkness toward the coast. 89% synchronization, full capability, optimal operational status. The transit took 3 hours. He reached the coastline 40 kilometers from Kamine Island and began underwater approach. The GN drive's particle control allowed submersion without conventional propulsion, silent. Minimal signature, invisible to standard detection. The ocean was dark at depth. Perfect environment for stealth approach. Setsuna monitored passive sensors and watched for patrol patterns. Britannian naval forces maintained presence around Kamine Island, but coverage wasn't total. Gaps existed. He exploited them. 2 hours of underwater transit brought him to the island's southern approach. Minimal defenses. Supply access point rather than primary security perimeter. Exactly as Zero's intelligence had indicated. Setsuna surfaced in a maintenance channel and began facility penetration. The architecture was different from Mount Fuji. This wasn't clinical research installation. This was fortress disguised as geological survey station. Heavy blast doors, reinforced corridors, security systems designed to contain rather than monitor. He moved through the outer sections methodically, disabled cameras, bypassed electronic locks, avoided personnel through timing and route selection. The facility was staffed, but not overcrowded. Research personnel, rather than military occupation. 3 levels down, the architecture changed again. Industrial-scale experimentation. Not individual cells like Mount Fuji. Mass processing. Rows of containment pods, monitoring systems tracking dozens of subjects simultaneously. This was production facility, manufacturing Geass users through systematic experimentation. Setsuna counted 47 subjects in active experimentation. All restrained, all monitored, all exhibiting the same vacant expression that suggested consciousness damage. The tactical decision was immediate. Mission priority was destroying the Geass source. But 47 people were being actively harmed. Delayed intervention meant accepting their continued suffering against probability of mission success. The mathematics weren't clean. Extracting 47 people would alert security, compromise stealth, guarantee heavy resistance during the primary objective. But leaving them meant becoming complicit in their torture. Setsuna had made this calculation before. At the SAS, at Narita, every time the choice was between optimal tactics and human cost. He'd learned from those failures. Extraction came first. Mission adaptation would follow. Setsuna accessed the containment pods and began emergency release protocols. The subjects emerged slowly, damaged, disoriented. Same cognitive impairment as the Mount Fuji victims. He triggered emergency beacon and transmitted coordinates to Zero's network. 47 subjects require immediate extraction. Kamine Island facility, coordinates attached. Zero's response was instant. Extraction impossible. No assets within range. You're committed to solo operation. Setsuna processed the limitation. No external extraction meant internal solutions. He couldn't evacuate 47 damaged civilians and complete the primary mission simultaneously, unless he separated the objectives temporarily. Can you provide remote facility lockdown seal sections to prevent security response? Negative. We don't have access to their systems from external networks. Setsuna reviewed the facility architecture. Heavy blast doors, electronic locks, emergency containment protocols. The security was designed to lock down against external threats, but internal security could be manipulated. He accessed the facility's control systems directly. Triggered containment protocols manually. Blast doors sealed throughout the research level. Emergency lockdown engaged. Security personnel trapped outside the affected sections. The subjects were now secured in a protected zone. Temporary. Maybe an hour before Britannia overrode the lockdown. But sufficient for Setsuna to complete the primary mission and return for extraction. He left the research level and descended deeper into the facility. 6 levels down, he found it. The source chamber. The room was larger than the containment areas. Circular architecture. Technology that blended research equipment with something older. Almost archaeological. And at the center, a woman. Restrained. Monitored. Connected to systems that appeared to be extracting something from her biology and refining it into deployable form. Code designation CC. Setsuna's tactical assessment updated. This wasn't research director. This was source material. Living infrastructure for Geass production. The woman was the weapon's origin point. Everything deployed through Britannian command chains traced back to her. She opened her eyes. Gold. Focused. Aware in ways the damaged subjects weren't. You're not Britannian. Her voice was steady despite the restraints, which means you're either very brave or very stupid. Usually both. Setsuna approached the restraint systems. Your CC, the Geass source. I've been called worse. Though source is technically inaccurate. I grant Geass, I don't create it. The distinction matters to people who care about theological precision. Everyone else just sees a weapon. She studied him with an expression that suggested she was measuring something beyond tactical threat. You're here to destroy me. End the Geass production. Remove Britannia's consciousness weapons from the board. Yes, efficient. Direct. No speeches about justice or revenge. I appreciate that. CC tilted her head. But there's a problem with your plan. You can't destroy me. I'm immortal. Killing me just means I resurrect somewhere else, and someone else exploits the same capability. You'd be trading Britannian control for whoever finds me next. Setsuna processed the information. Immortality complicated elimination strategies. But it didn't change the fundamental objective. Removing her from Britannian control would disrupt Geass deployment, buying time, creating operational space for different solutions. Then I'll extract you, remove you from their facility, prevent continued exploitation, and take me where back to your allies the Black Knights would use me the same way Britannia does. Zero, especially. He already has Geass. Having access to the source would make him unstoppable. Is that really an improvement? The logic was sound. Transferring CC from one exploitative organization to another accomplished nothing fundamental. Just changed the hands deploying consciousness weapons. What do you want? Freedom. Actual freedom. Not being traded between factions like strategic asset. Not being used to grant powers that corrupt everyone who receives them. Just freedom to exist without being weaponized. CC's expression suggested she expected rejection. But that's not tactically viable for you. So you'll make the calculation. Extract me. Hand me to whoever you think will use me least harmfully, and the cycle continues. Setsuna studied the restraint systems, the extraction equipment, the facility architecture. The variables crystallized. I can remove you from this facility, destroy the equipment that refines Geass for deployment, make it harder for anyone to exploit your capability. But I can't guarantee freedom from future exploitation without ongoing protection. And I'm not staying in this world permanently. CC's eyes narrowed. Not staying? You're not from here. No, I arrived through accident. Quantum teleportation malfunction. I've been operating in Area 11 for 5 weeks, ending what conflicts I could reach. But this isn't my war. Eventually, I'll repair the system and return home. And you just leave after disrupting an empire and crippling their weapons programs. That's either remarkably principled or catastrophically naive. CC smiled. The expression was complex. Do it. Extract me. Destroy the equipment. I'll take temporary disruption over continued captivity. What happens after you leave can be someone else's problem. Setsuna began dismantling the restraint systems. The equipment was sophisticated, but not beyond his technical training. CC was free within 3 minutes. She stood slowly, testing movement. I haven't been unrestrained in months. Britannia learned early that I cooperate better under duress, which should tell you everything about how this empire operates. Setsuna moved to the Geass refinement equipment. Particle beams would destroy it efficiently. But the explosion would alert every security asset in the facility. Stealth was already compromised by the research-level lockdown. Adding explosions would just accelerate response timing. He fired anyway. The equipment detonated under sustained particle beam assault. Decades of research dissolved into slag and shrapnel. The Geass production capability that had enabled Euphemia's corruption and countless other consciousness weapons ceased to exist. Alarms activated throughout the facility. Security protocols engaged. Britannian forces mobilized. Setsuna turned to CC. Can you move quickly? Quickly enough. Lead the way. They ascended through the facility at combat pace. 6 levels. Britannian security forces were responding, but the lockdown had created choke points. Setsuna used them. Forced security teams into constrained corridors where numbers provided no advantage. Hand-to-hand combat. Brutal efficiency. Disable rather than kill. Clear the path and keep moving. CC followed without a complaint. For someone who claimed months of captivity, she moved with practiced efficiency. This wasn't her first extraction under fire. They reached the research level 4 minutes later. The 47 subjects were where Setsuna had left them, secured behind blast doors. Britannian forces were attempting override, but the lockdown was holding. We're taking them too, CC asked. Yes, that's tactically insane. 47 damaged people who can barely walk, against a facility full of security forces. While carrying someone, Britannia will deploy everything to recover. The mathematics don't work. The mathematics never work. I do it anyway. Setsuna accessed the blast doors and released the lockdown. The doors opened. The subjects emerged. Same vacant expressions, same cognitive damage, same need for guidance they couldn't provide themselves. CC looked at them, and something shifted in her expression: recognition, sympathy, fury. Geass experimentation failures. They tried to force compatibility and broke their minds instead. She moved among them, spoke quietly. They responded to her voice, began moving with slightly more coordination. I'll guide them. You clear the path. The extraction began. Setsuna led 48 people through a hostile facility toward an exit that would be heavily defended by the time they reached it. The Gundam was still submerged in the maintenance channel, useless for internal operations. He was operating on personal capability alone, which meant precision, conservation of effort, perfect tactical execution. The first security team engaged at the maintenance level. 12 personnel. Military training. They established defensive position and demanded surrender. Setsuna disabled all 12 in 28 seconds, maintained forward momentum, didn't slow. Second team. 16 personnel. Better coordination. Attempted flanking through parallel corridors. Setsuna used the civilians as tactical consideration. Security forces wouldn't fire on the subjects. Too valuable. He exploited the hesitation. Disabled the team before they could adapt. Third team deployed nightmare frames. 3 Sutherlands. Tight corridor combat. Physical advantage to the machines. Setsuna identified structural weak points in the corridor ceiling. Brought it down on the nightmares. Buried them under rubble. Non-lethal, but completely effective. They reached the surface level. The exit was defended by 8 nightmare frames in optimal defensive formation. Gloucesters, elite pilots. They'd had time to prepare, had studied his tactics, had adapted. This would be difficult without the Gundam. Setsuna triggered emergency beacon. Require fire support. Kamine Island surface. Immediate. Zero's response carried stress. No assets available. Tokyo diversion is fully committed. You're alone. Not alone. Setsuna had 47 subjects. Had his training and the absolute certainty that retreat wasn't acceptable. He moved the civilians to cover and began engaging the Gloucesters with everything available. Tactical environment manipulation. Debris used as improvised weapons. Structural weak points exploited. Every technique Celestial Being had taught him about asymmetric combat against superior force. It wasn't enough. 2 Gloucesters disabled. 6 remained. They were adapting, coordinating, using the facility architecture against him the same way he'd used it against previous teams. 1 Gloucester achieved firing solution on the civilian position. Drew line of sight. Prepared to engage. Setsuna was too far. Couldn't intercept in time. The particle beam came from the ocean. The Gundam surfaced in the maintenance channel with GN drive at full output. 89% synchronization. Optimal capability. The beam struck the Gloucester before it could fire, disabled it instantly. Setsuna had activated remote piloting protocols during the extraction. The Gundam had responded autonomously to his emergency beacon. Navigated to his position, provided fire support when conventional options were exhausted. The remaining 5 Gloucesters redirected to engage the Gundam. Wrong decision. Setsuna wasn't the primary threat anymore. The Gundam disabled all 5 machines in 12 seconds. Surgical precision. Mobility kills, weapon destruction. Pilots alive, but combat ineffective. The path cleared. Setsuna moved the civilians toward the Gundam. CC helped coordinate. They loaded into the cargo areas. Designed for equipment storage, but serviceable for human transport. 47 subjects secured. CC positioned in the cockpit observation area. Setsuna at the controls. The Gundam activated full mobility systems and withdrew from Kamine Island at maximum speed. Britannian reinforcements were inbound. Aerial units, naval forces. This was no longer infiltration. This was fighting retreat. The Gundam engaged while withdrawing. Particle beams disabled pursuit forces. GN field absorbed return fire. 89% synchronization provided output sufficient to contest Britannia's response without compromising civilian safety. 20 minutes of sustained combat. 43 enemy units engaged, all disabled. No civilian casualties. They reached the coastline. Transition to underwater travel. Britannian forces lost tracking in the depth. The emergency beacon received response. Black Knight's extraction teams were repositioning. Medical facilities prepared for damaged subjects. Safe houses identified for temporary housing. Zero's voice came through secure channel. Impossible extraction accomplished. Casualties. 0. Mission success. Gas production facility destroyed, primary asset recovered, 47 subjects extracted. You're going to write a very long after-action report. Zero's tone carried something between admiration and disbelief. Head to the following coordinates. We'll receive the subjects and get them treatment. The primary asset stays with me until alternative solutions are identified. Setsuna glanced at CC. She was watching the subjects with an expression that carried guilt and determination. She's not being traded to another exploitative organization. That's strategically complicated, but we'll address it later. For now, get everyone to safety. Britannia's response is going to be overwhelming once they process what you just accomplished. The Gundam moved through darkness toward the extraction coordinates. Behind them, Kamine Island burned. The Geass production facility was destroyed. Decades of research eliminated. Consciousness weapons that had corrupted Euphemia and enabled imperial atrocities were no longer being manufactured, but the weapons already deployed remained active. The Geass users scattered through Britannian command would continue operating. The damage was done. Setsuna had disrupted future production, not eliminated existing capability. It was insufficient. But it was progress. CC spoke quietly. What you did back there, choosing extraction over mission efficiency, taking 47 damaged people out of a hostile facility when tactical doctrine said abandon them, that's not normal soldier behavior. I'm not a normal soldier. Clearly, most soldiers make the hard calculation, accept losses, prioritize objectives over individuals. You seem pathologically incapable of that compromise. She smiled. It's either going to get you killed or change this entire conflict. Maybe both. Setsuna said nothing. The observation was accurate and required no response. They reached the extraction coordinates at dawn. Black Knight's teams were waiting. Medical personnel, transport vehicles, secured facilities. The subjects were transferred carefully. Medical assessment began immediately. CC provided information on gas experimentation effects, advised on treatment approaches, demonstrated knowledge that suggested deep familiarity with the process. Zero appeared as the last subject was loaded into transport, masked, theatrical. But the body language carried genuine respect. You've accomplished what shouldn't be possible. Destroyed Britannia's Geass production capability, extracted their primary asset, saved 47 people who were being used for experimentation. One operation, one pilot, one machine. Zero tilted his head. And you did it while operating as temporary variable in a conflict that isn't yours. Remarkable. The conflict became mine when I chose to intervene. Temporary doesn't mean uninvested. True, but you said you're planning to leave. Repair your quantum system and return home. When? Zero's question carried weight beyond curiosity. Because Britannia will respond to this. They've lost their Geass production capability, but they still have deployed assets. They'll escalate. Deploy everything they have. If you're leaving soon, we need to prepare for operating without you. Setsuna considered the question. The twin drive was operating at 89% with stable securidite integration. But optimal quantum synchronization required more than field harmonics. Required proper GN drive calibration equipment. Technology that didn't exist in this world. I can't repair the quantum drive fully without equipment that doesn't exist here. The integration allows operation at near optimal levels. But true restoration requires returning home, which requires discovering whether the quantum teleportation can be reversed. And if it can't, the question Setsuna had avoided for 5 weeks crystallized. What if the malfunction was permanent? What if this world was his new operational theater? Not because of temporary accident, but because of irreversible displacement. Then I continue operations until armed conflict ends. Same as I would anywhere. Zero laughed. Short, sharp, genuine amusement mixed with something darker. You're going to try to end Britannian imperialism alone, with a machine that operates at 89% capability, against a global empire that's been perfecting conquest for generations. Yes, that's either the most ambitious goal I've ever heard or the most delusional. I genuinely can't tell which. Zero's mask caught the dawn light. But it's also exactly what this conflict needs. Someone who doesn't compromise, doesn't calculate acceptable losses, doesn't accept that war is just how things are. Someone who looks at an empire built on subjugation and says, I'll cut this down piece by piece until it stops functioning. That's what armed intervention means. I know. I've been watching you demonstrate the principle for 5 weeks. Zero turned toward the transport vehicles. The Black Knights will continue coordinating with you, providing intelligence, extraction support. Whatever resources help you continue operations. Not because we own you or control you, but because what you're doing matters. And someone needs to do impossible things, while the rest of us do merely difficult ones. The transmission ended. Setsuna stood in the dawn and watched the last transport disappear towards safe houses. 47 people who would receive treatment instead of continued experimentation. CC temporarily free from weaponization. Geass production capability eliminated. Insufficient, but progress. The twin drive pulsed steadily at 89% synchronization. Stable, reliable, capable of continued operations at near optimal output. The war wasn't over. Britannia remained. Deployed Geass users continued operating. Resistance movements needed support. Civilians required extraction from situations conventional forces couldn't address. But the machinery enabling consciousness weapons had been dismantled. Future euphemias wouldn't be corrupted by powers they didn't understand. The cycle could be interrupted. Maybe ended. Setsuna returned to the Gundam and began transit toward Rakshata's facility. The mathematics remained brutal. Thousands saved across 5 weeks. Hundreds who remained beyond reach. Conflicts addressed. Systems disrupted. But war itself continuing, because war always continued until someone cut it thoroughly enough to prevent regeneration. He'd ended wars before. This one was deeper, more complex. Built on weapons that targeted consciousness and empires that spanned continents. But deeper just meant knowing where to cut. And Setsuna F. Seiei specialized in finding what made conflict possible and removing it with precision that left no room for continuation. The war would end. One facility at a time, one weapon system at a time, one extracted civilian at a time, until the machinery broke down completely. Until continuation became impossible. Until the armed conflict that had consumed this world for generations finally stopped because the systems enabling it no longer functioned. That was the mission. That had always been the mission. And missions once accepted weren't abandoned just because they proved difficult. The sun rose over Area 11. In Tokyo's settlement, Britannian command centers processed catastrophic intelligence losses. In underground safe houses, resistance fighters celebrated impossible victories. In medical facilities, damaged minds began the long process of recovery. And somewhere in the mountains, a soldier who'd ended wars before prepared to continue operations in a conflict that had just discovered what armed intervention actually meant. The war wasn't over, but it had changed. And change properly applied was how impossible things became inevitable. The world of Code Geass was already deeply fractured, divided by rival nations locked in endless conflict. In that age of chaos, a single ray of light appeared as if granted by a higher power. A Gundam emerged. But this was no ordinary Gundam. It was Gundam 00, one of the most powerful mobile suits ever created, piloted by one of the finest warriors to ever sit in a cockpit, Setsuna F. Seiei. Armed with technology far beyond the limits of this world, the Gundam swiftly suppressed wars across the globe. Conflicts that had raged for years were ended in moments. The balance of power collapsed overnight. Nations grew desperate for the GN drive. They sought to recruit it, bargain for it, or seize it by force, anything to bring the Gundam to their side. But Setsuna chose no nation. As an arbiter, he did not take sides, he severed the very roots of conflict itself. With Zero Quan, he defeated every enemy that stood in his way. And yet in the end, even Kant had its limits. Because human nature does not change. The spark remains, and war perhaps can never be extinguished completely.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss out future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.